Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Saturday, June 19th, and Notre Dame has just picked up a commitment from California linebacker Junior Tuihalamaka. And that is what we are going to talk about today. This is a commitment that's been a long time in the making, and we're going to just kind of go over Junior's recruiting profile. We're going to go over his recruitment. We're going to talk about what this means for Notre Dame. We're going to watch a little film, talk about what he brings to the Notre Dame defense. And then, of course, we're going to talk to y'all. We're going to answer y'all's questions, and we're going to dive into this. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's next. Now, I know I wore this shirt yesterday, but I felt it was only fitting to wear it again today because Notre Dame has picked up a gap closer. And that is what Junior Tuihalamaka is at this point in time. So let's first and foremost dive into what this commitment means for – or actually, let's first dive into how this recruitment went down. First of all, Junior was a player that was offered one of the very first offers by Marcus Freeman when he was hired. When Marcus Freeman was hired at Notre Dame, he did not have Junior Tuihalamaka was not offered by Notre Dame. He did not have an offer from Notre Dame, and he was committed to USC. Shortly after his decision or Notre Dame's decision to offer him a scholarship, he decommitted from USC. It became very clear early on that Notre Dame was going to be a player for Junior his entire recruitment. And honestly, he was a kid that Notre Dame was really been the leader for since going back to January. Now, other programs did a great job getting involved. Stanford gave him a lot to think about. Texas did the best job recruiting him other than Notre Dame. There were other programs involved. Oregon was involved there, and Arizona State was involved. But this was really a Notre Dame-Texas battle with Notre Dame the clear leader the entire time. Texas did a great job making Junior feel desired in that defense, showing him how he'd fit in that defense. They made it maybe closer than it was going into that visit, but this is a situation where, Junior was a kid that was he was a Notre Dame-bound kid. And so that's kind of how that recruitment went down. A great job by Marcus Freeman and his staff to be able to make this one happen. Look, California, to me, is a very important state for Notre Dame. I don't believe it's a state that Notre Dame has to recruit 8-9 kids a year from, but Notre Dame has to be able to go to California and get multiple of the best players from that state on a yearly basis. And Junior Tuihalamaka is certainly one of those players. So this is a big, big commitment for Notre Dame. Let's talk a little bit about his commitment or his recruiting profile. And just kind of how he was when he was originally offered by Notre Dame, he was a consensus top 100 recruit. Since his junior season, which was a shortened junior season, played in the spring, his profile's gone down a little bit, but his talent has not changed at all. It's just his recruiting profile has gone down, which to me, as you all know, doesn't bother me too much. ESPN still ranks him as the number 95 overall player in the country. He's the number 108 overall player on the 247 Sports composite list. ESPN also ranks him as the number one inside linebacker in the country. I think that's accurate for me when I regards to just the Mike linebacker, just a pure middle of the defense thumper, Manti Te'o type of Mike linebacker. To me, Junior Tuihalamaka is the best in the country at that position, and so I think that ESPN is in this instance is the more accurate of the rankings when it comes to Junior Tuihalamaka at this point in time. Let's talk a little bit about why this is an important commitment for Notre Dame. I think number one, look, you're looking at a kid who's talented, right? And anytime you can land a talented player, that's a positive. He's highly ranked. If you're someone who puts a lot of stock into recruiting rankings, this helps with the recruiting rankings. When you're landing a top 100 caliber player to a class that was already ranked, second or third in the country at this point in time, this obviously is going to help them close the gap on just from a recruiting ranking standpoint with the points-based recruiting classes. And you look at it, 15th overall commitment, 8th on defense so far. And when you look at the commitments that Notre Dame has, if you're someone who values recruiting rankings and in star rankings, which again, I've always said they have some value when in times like this, when we're trying to evaluate how a recruiting class is, they're just not, they don't define what a player is, and they're not always obviously definitive of what a player can be. But let's look at it from just a recruiting ranking standpoint. You have Tyson Ford, who's a top 150 player at defensive end. You've got Aiden Gabera, who has skyrocketed up the recruiting rankings. He's now considered a top 250 caliber player. 247 Sports has him in the 150, also a defensive end. You've got Josh Burnham, who's a top 100 recruit at linebacker. You now have junior Tuihalamaka, who is a top 100 recruit at linebacker. You've got Nolan Ziegler, who is a consensus 4-star recruit at linebacker. Then you have Jade Mickey, who is also a consensus 4-star recruit at cornerback. So it's a very, very strong start to this defensive haul. And when you look at it, what's interesting is there's a lot of guys on this board that either didn't have Notre Dame offers when Marcus Freeman was hired, or Notre Dame was trailing when Marcus Freeman was hired. So certainly he's had a huge impact on how this class is shaping up, and they're not close to being done yet, and that's the exciting thing for me. So you've added another highly ranked player to what is already a strong recruiting class. Let's talk about the need. Another reason why this is important recruitment and commitment for Notre Dame. There's a couple aspects of this. Number one, just linebacker as a whole was a big need for Notre Dame. Obviously, last year, Notre Dame signed 2 linebackers. Keanu Key is more of a project, but he's a guy that he's going to need time. He may take a Mormon mission. He's a good player, but he's not the high ceiling kind of guy that you'd expect from a program like Notre Dame. But again, we've seen from those Hawaii kids with the Lohi Gilman and Myron Tungavaloa that what they are in high school, it doesn't always define what they are going to be in college. And certainly those guys can be underrated and really blow up when they get to college. So I'm excited to see Kahanu, but right now the film doesn't tell me he's a difference maker. You also signed Prince Collie last year, who is a difference maker. But the year before that, you signed 0 linebackers. And then you look at the 2 previous classes. The 2018 class is basically half of it's gone already. Jack Lamb's gone. Ovia Gofu's gone. You have Bo Bauer and Shane Simon entering their senior years. They're going to be 5th-year seniors when this class arrives. The 2019 class is yet to develop a starter on the inside. You do have Jack Kaiser, who projects to be a starter this upcoming season. But none of those guys have really started yet. Aceto Egwana, who is one of the top-ranked linebackers in that class, is playing Viper into this spring. And so when you look at it, there was 2 needs in this class. Well, really 3 that relate to junior Tuihalamaka. Number one, you needed depth at linebacker in this class. You need 4 guys, right? 3 was the minimum, 4 was the desire, right? If you got 3 top linebackers, if Notre Dame just stops recruiting linebackers right now, which they're not going to do, get to that. But if they stopped recruiting linebackers right now, they would meet their minimum need, and they would meet it with talented players, 3 talented players. So that's a big check. And that's also the second part. It's not just numbers, but are you getting impact talent? They're getting impact talent, and impact talent that fits well together. If you just look at the 3-man linebacker core right now, when you look at Marcus Freeman's defense, you've got Nolan Ziegler for Rover, you got Josh Burnham for the Will, and you got junior Tuihalamaka for the Mike. And that brings me to my third and final reason why this is a big pickup for Notre Dame. I believe that there is a need to have at least 1 or 2 just pure Mike linebackers in a modern defense. We've gone through about a 5 or 6 year stretch where the Mike linebacker has somewhat become negated because of the manner in which teams have spread the field and things along those lines. There isn't the need necessarily for a Manti Te'o anymore. But I believe with the advent, or not the advent, but the emphasis that we're seeing on RPOs and the way that Marcus Freeman runs his defense, and we're going to do a film breakdown on this very soon, I believe that there's a advantage if you can find a 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 240 plus, just thumper, just a guy that from tight end to tight end from an attached standpoint can just dominate the box and can do a lot of things that maybe a smaller, more athletic player can't do physically, just from a power standpoint. I think that allows you to then defend the run game with maybe fewer bodies, or at least maybe bodies coming from depth. So safeties, outside linebackers, things along those lines. So I think that is an area where you see junior Tuihalamaka filling that need. There are guys that project to play Mike linebacker in this defense. J.D. Bertrand can play Mike linebacker. Osita Egwana, if he stays at linebacker, could play Mike linebacker. Shane Simon, if you needed him to, could move in and play Mike linebacker. But other than Bo Bauer, who's potentially could be gone, but at the very least is going to be a 5th-year senior when this recruiting class shows up, there's really not a true pure Mike linebacker. And even Bo Bauer, is a 225 to 230 pound guy. Junior Tuihalamaka is going to show up on campus probably weighing more than Bo Bauer is going to weigh. So I think there was a need for that type of pure thumper. Now, that type of player is not going to necessarily fit against every single team that you play, but we've seen in recent years that kind of linebacker has been successful in defenses. And we saw it in Alabama this year, had, some bigger linebackers, although not as big as they've had in the past, but you've seen it from Clemson. Trey Lamar was that kind of guy. James Kalski's that kind of guy. James Kalski's not a guy you're going to want to get out in space and go run against your tight ends all day or play against your slot. So you're going to want to have covering your backs all day. But he is a thumper in the box, and we saw in the ACC championship what kind of impact a guy like James Skalski can have on a defense. So we have seen guys like that, and so I do think there was a need for a pure Mike linebacker in the Notre Dame defense. So now let's talk about Junior Tuihalamaka's game and why this is a big pickup, because obviously all that other stuff is the on paper argument. Now let's look at Junior on film, and I'm going to first pull up his sophomore film, and we're gonna watch that. Again, if you didn't tune in yesterday, I apologize for my voice. My voice is still not fully recovered, but I do feel I'm getting closer to that level. But let's watch a little film of Junior Tuihalamaka and talk about why this is a big pickup for Notre Dame. Y'all don't need to see me, so let's just get to the film. The first thing you're going to see is this is a kid that's got the size that you want at the position. Let's get that back here real quick. This is a kid that's a very thick-bodied, strong lower half, physical player. And what you're going to see right here, you're going to see a lot of plays like this where he has the play just completely timed up. That's not a blitz. If it is a blitz, then they blitz him a lot because he times these things up so effectively. You can see it on game film as well, where he'll either do plays like this or he'll just blow up the guard unless somebody else runs through it. But you're seeing a kid that's got a really nice first step. Now, again, if you're asking for him to be a sideline-to-sideline player, that's not what he does, and that's not what Notre Dame is recruiting him to do. They're recruiting him to do things like this, to beat linemen to the ball, to shoot gaps, to be physical at the point of attack. And if you're going to run off tackle or anywhere inside of an off-tackle run, he's going to be a presence. And that's what I like about these highlights is his first few clips of these goal line situations where he's just physically flowing to the ball. Look at the instincts here, right? This is a smart linebacker. Do you see where he's lined up? You see the little arrow there? That's where Junior is playing. He flows over 3 gaps. He's in the backside A gap. He ends up in the C gap and makes this play at the, 2-yard line? Tremendous, tremendous instincts. Very instinctive player, very smart player, gets great reads. And he's got he's got good short area quickness. Is he a guy that's going to fly from sideline to sideline? Like, to me, I say like there's 3 types of Mike linebackers. There's the rare that you just hardly ever see, sideline to sideline guy, which is a bit of an exaggeration because nobody truly plays sideline to sideline from the middle of the field when they're 5 yards away from the ball. But there's sort of the slot to slot guys, which are the rangier guys. They're not really thumpers. This is a nice play here. I'm going to see it from the tight version. Finds the route, gets underneath the route, then gets his eyes on the quarterback. But there's the slot-to-slot guys. They're the rangier guys. They can be used a lot more in the pass game to cover and things like that. They're usually not as big and powerful. They're usually just more fast, athletic guys, like a Drew White type of player, for example. Then there's what I call the tight end to tight end guys, and they are pure box players. And to me, that is what makes Junior Tuihalamaka so good. He is a box player. You have to understand what you're getting in him. And learn to love it because he's really good at it. But he is a guy that's going to play in the box. Again, look at the instincts, gets through the line. What you saw from him as a junior is he played with such a better base, or as a sophomore, is he played with a much better base than he did as a junior. As a junior, he tended to play a little bit high, a little bit out of control at times, trying to make a lot of plays, and it got him out of position from some of the games that I saw, had him out of position. But that's a correctable thing. When you watch him here as a sophomore, he was much more under control, much more poised, played with a better base, and he was far more effective. Overran that play a little bit. Good hustle, but he overran that play. He doesn't have the tremendous twitchiness that maybe you see from smaller, more athletic players. But again, that's part of the package that you're getting. He's not a guy that's going to show the Jalen Smith type of change of direction. He is a downhill thumper. That's what you're getting from Junior Tuihalamaka. Now, the one thing I would say about him is I do think he's a guy that you could actually streamline him a little bit, maybe have him lose just a little bit of weight and then build it back up, with a little bit more lean weight and get him back up to 240 that way. But again, you're going to see a kid that's pretty light on his feet. Not explosive. Not a guy that's going to be, running sideline to sideline. But he's got very good short area quickness and power. He's very nimble. Stays light on his feet. Again, he's a kid. This is sophomore film, mind you. It's got definitely above average length. And what you'll see too from him in some game film is, and right now this is the highlights, but there's some game film that's even better. But what you see in the game film is a kid that can also line up on the edge and come off the edge. So depending on how big he gets, he could be a guy that could be, a Justin Adamiola type of player down the road, in my opinion. So, if he's not the starting Mike linebacker, and if he blows up too much. And again, sometimes kids just put on weight because their bodies are just naturally so big that they just are going to blow up. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but what I am saying is that Junior Tuihalamaka is not a guy that is a Mike linebacker or bust. There are a lot of different things you can use him in the defense for, especially a defense like Notre Dame's. And Marcus Freeman, at least based on what we saw from him at Cincinnati, this could be different. See, that's again what I'm talking about, being light on his feet. Stays light on his feet. Good change of direction there. Closes quick on the ball carrier. But what we saw from Marcus Freeman in his defense at Cincinnati is his Mike linebackers were used a lot on run stunts and blitzes. And what those are those are a run stunt is essentially a blitz against the run, okay? And it means that, you're using him to attack downhill, attack the line of scrimmage, attack a gap. They do a lot of insertion with their Mike linebacker. And that's certainly a role that I think Junior Tuihalamaka can play and play at a high level. And that's another reason why I think from a scheme standpoint, this is a good fit for Notre Dame. And he's going to fit what they do well. And as I said, he's not someone you have to just plug right in the middle of your defense and say, okay, he's going to play Mike and you can't ever move him from the middle of your defense. There's a lot of different things that I think Junior Tuihalamaka can do in this defense. And I think that's a big reason why Marcus Freeman identified him immediately. And that's the interesting thing about this is this isn't a kid that Notre Dame looked at and eventually got because they've missed out on other guys. I mean, if you think about it, Marcus Freeman chose this guy over Sebastian Cheeks, for example. Notre Dame could have easily had Sebastian Cheeks, who's an Illinois linebacker. He was, from what I was told, he was a kid that was very close to picking Notre Dame, but Notre Dame liked a couple other guys better. Junior Tuihalamaka being one of those players, which is why Sebastian Cheeks isn't in this class right now and why his visit this weekend was canceled. So I think that's another part to this is a guy that right or wrong, and I think it's right, Marcus Freeman looked at as soon as he got hired and said, I need that kind of guy in my defense. And the thing that makes him a little bit unique is there really isn't anybody else like him in this defense. There are other guys that can play Mike. I think Josh Burnham could play Mike. Should Notre Dame land Jalen Sneed, I think he could play Mike in time as more of a, that slot to slot, that really rangy type of guy. That's what I think he could do. But when you look at Junior is the most pure middle linebacker in this defense, and that's what makes him a good fit. So now let's talk about what's next at linebacker, because Notre Dame is not done at linebacker in 2022. Now, to begin, as I said, 3 linebackers was the minimum need. 4 is the desire. And the reason 4 is the desire is because they want there's a specific player that they want, and that player is Jalen Sneed. I think Notre Dame would be perfectly content with just 3 linebackers. And a big reason for that is because the 2023 linebacker class is absolutely loaded. And there's a lot of kids with early interest in Notre Dame, whether it be Takis Curtis, whether it be Drake Bone, who's an in-state kid, Trey Edwards. Notre Dame could easily say, hey, we'll bring 3 in this year and bring in maybe 4 next year. But I think what Notre Dame is looking for is 4 this year and 2 to 3 next year, because that's how much they like this class. And you've already got 3 now guys in the class. There's one final piece, and that's it. It's Jalen Sneed or bust at this point in time. They're not looking at Sebastian Cheeks anymore. That's now obvious. I kind of hinted at this recently, but now it's out there. His visit has been canceled. He's not coming to Notre Dame this weekend. He's not going to be on. He is not on campus this weekend. But you do have Josh Burnham and Nolan Ziegler on campus this weekend with some of the other recruits. But when it comes to linebacker, it's Jalen Sneed or bust. Jalen Sneed just recently visited Notre Dame. Obviously, Junior Tuihalamaka visited from Friday and left Sunday morning. Jalen Sneed showed up on Monday and then left Wednesday. That's their ultimate goal. Notre Dame knocked that one out of the park, just like they knocked Junior's visit out of the park. And now they're going to try to close on them and get them in the class officially. So that's where they're at when it comes to recruiting linebacker. We see Junior Tuihalamaka is if right now is the three linebackers. Junior would be the Mike, Josh Burnham would be a Will, Nolan Sneed would be the Rover. A guy like Jalen Sneed is a guy that could maybe start at Rover, and that's what they're talking to him about now. But I think he could outgrow that because of his tremendous athleticism. We didn't see much of him in coverage in high school. He was playing defensive end as a junior, but he's been at several camps, and we've seen and this is where camps can be beneficial, right? This is where camps can be good for you, and that is, hey, look, I see a lot of great things from the kid on film, but we don't see him in coverage. Can he cover? Well, then he goes to camp. You see foot quickness in space. You see the ability to flip his hips. You see instincts and coverage, things like that. And you say, okay, that athleticism that we see in other things translates into coverage. And so those are some areas where you could say, hey, a summer camp has helped improve your opinion of him as a player. So that is where they're at with the fourth linebacker, the desire to land a fourth linebacker in this class. And so that's wrapping up where we're at. Junior Tuihalamaka is now in Notre Dame's class, a top 100 recruit, another top 100 defensive recruit, and the second linebacker that Marcus Freeman has landed since getting hired. Obviously, Nolan Ziegler was already in the class. He was a guy that Marcus Freeman offered when he was at Cincinnati, but he had already committed to Notre Dame. They got Josh Burnham in March. Now they got Junior Tuihalamaka in June. They have him officially in June. This is one of the kids that, okay, we had hinted in May about there being several silent commitments on the board. This is one of those guys that I had been told didn't necessarily say that he was locked in for sure, definitely 100% coming, because he still wanted to take visits. But this has been one where Notre Dame knew that this is the guy that they wanted and were going to get for some time. It just had to make sure that the visit went great. And the visit went great. So he is in the class. And so this is a big pickup for Notre Dame. Another highly ranked player. I'm curious to see where I believe Notre Dame is still solidified in the third spot on 247 and Rivals. It's from the points system. If they get one more, let's say they add another highly ranked linebacker to the class in the near future, or another 4-star kid, I do believe this would bump them up to that would bump them up to number 2. But right now they're still locked into the number 2 spot in those classes. So that is it. That is going to be it for this Junior Tuihalamaka breakdown. But we're going to answer your questions, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. But we have some people that are obviously very fired up about this commitment. Brent Byers is fired up about this commitment. DJ McCowan asks, Coach, I get the sneaky feeling that this could be part of a run on commitments like we have seen in summers past. Am I off? Still going to enjoy the heck out of this pickup. Go Irish. DJ, I don't think you're off. I think a lot of these kids are now getting on campus. As we talked about earlier in the week, Notre Dame is encouraging some of these kids that already had visits scheduled to take the visits that you already had scheduled. So that's why you're seeing, some defensive backs take visits, even though Notre Dame really likes where they're at. It's why the Notre Dame coaching staff told, one of junior, hey, visit Texas before you visit us. Hey, Jalen Sneed, go visit Oregon. They want to make sure that these young men are certain of that decision. And that's why Notre Dame doesn't push kids to commit on campus. But I don't think this is going to be the only commitment of June. I don't think this is going to be one of a couple commitments in June. I do believe, DJ, that if I was a betting man, I would bet that this is going to be one of several commitments that Notre Dame gets in the month of June. And a lot of them that I see happening right now are going to be on defense. And so, again, I think this is a big one. And now they're going to turn all their attention into obviously the linebacker and getting Jalen Sneed. That's their last piece to that really dynamic puzzle. And the thing I like about it is you see Junior, you've already seen Junior kind of working on Jalen. You've seen obviously Josh Burnham working on Jalen. Josh Burnham, was obviously on campus with Junior and Nolan Ziegler. And so now that trio can kind of say, hey man, you're the final piece of this puzzle. And that's what I think you're going to see. Tom Balork says, that's great news. Who's next to climb aboard this train? I don't know who I would say is definitely going to be next. I think there's 3 or 4 guys that I could see making a decision somewhat soon, but I'd be a little surprised if the next commitment's not on defense, unless Notre Dame pushes for a commitment from one of the 2 receivers that are on campus this weekend. That would be the only offensive players that I could see committing before the next couple defensive players, and maybe an offensive lineman decides to go public, but I'm not quite as sold on that one as I was in weeks past. DBZ asks, does he start next year? Well, he'll start. Obviously, he's got one more year of high school left. Do I think he starts in 2022? I mean, I don't see that. I think he's going to have to beat out some older good players. I think you're going to have, obviously, Bo Bauer could potentially be back for a fifth year that year. He's could because of the COVID. See, Bo Bauer's and Shane Simon were originally going to be done after 2021. This was going to be their last year. Well, because of COVID, both now have fifth year of eligibility remaining. I don't know if they're both going to take it, but they both can take it. And if Bo Bauer decides to come back, I would imagine he would be the starting Mike linebacker. Do I think Junior is a player that can certainly push for a starting job early in his career? Absolutely. But he's going to have to make sure that he has his weight in check. He's going to have to really work on improving his foot quickness, his short area quickness, his change of direction, because, as I said, there are other linebackers in his class that could also play Mike. So it just is going to depend on who's most ready to play early on. And I think for him, he's going to have the instincts. I think he's going to pick up the defense really quickly. He's going to have the power, but he's going to have to make sure that his agility is where it needs to be, and he's got his body in the right kind of place. So it's an impressive thing. Brent Byer says the new LBU and still reigning tight end U and O-line U. So, Brent, this is an interesting one. Because when you look at Notre Dame, if we're just talking about linebackers in college, I mean, you can make that case that Notre Dame is LBU. I mean, who else has 3 Butkus Award winners in the last decade? The answer is there's one team that does, and it's Notre Dame. I think the thing that's really interesting is Marcus Freeman was able to sell this based off that tradition and based off who he is. Because Notre Dame has not had a linebacker taken in the first round of the NFL draft since the early 1980s, since before Lou Holtz was the head coach. Now, we all know Jalen Smith would have been a first-round pick if not the injury, but that's the interesting thing is, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a middle-of-the-second-round pick, closer to, he was 50th, right? So he was closer to the second half of the second round. Jalen Smith was an early second-round pick. Manti was a second-round pick. We've seen some other guys, Drew Tranquil was a 4th-round pick. We've seen other guys go undrafted like Tavon Coney, Niles Morgan, Greer Martini, players like that. But they were able to sell, look what we're able to do. You've got Jalen Smith, you've got Manti, you've got, obviously, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, you've got Drew Tranquil. So you're starting to see Notre Dame putting more linebackers in the NFL. If they can develop a guy into maybe even an even higher pick, maybe a first-round pick, but although linebackers kind of becoming a little bit not as bad as running back, but you're just not seeing a ton of linebackers getting picked early like you used to back in the day when it was more of a pure 4-3 type of deal and it was more of a run-oriented league. But that's something I think can help. But I mean, gosh, they're poised to have the best linebacker class in the country, and they don't have those high draft picks. So it just goes to show it's not just about producing NFL talent. You have to be able to show that you can get the most out of players in college, and Notre Dame has done a pretty good job of that. Marcus Freeman has done a good job of that at Cincinnati, and he's going to inherit a depth chart and a roster that's already more talented than what he had at Cincinnati. And this recruiting class has a chance, if they can add one more player to it, to be the best that Notre Dame has landed in the Brian Kelly era, top to bottom. Obviously, like I said, there's no Jalen Smith in this group, but top to bottom, this has a chance to be the best linebacking class, besting the 2018 group. And then I think the second best right now, prior to this, would probably be the 2013 group that had Jalen Smith, Doug Randolph, and Michael Deeb. It wasn't a great class after Jalen, but that Michael Deeb was a good player, and Doug Randolph, some people had him as a top 250 player. But I think this is a class that is already surpassed those. It's whether or not it's going to surpass the 2018 group. And I think if they can add one more player, if they can add Jalen Sneed, then I think that's going to be the case. Patrick is obviously excited about this pickup. Thank you, Patrick, for that. Tom Balork, defensive coaches are recruiting rock stars right now. They really are doing a great job. There's still some guys that got to close on, but boy, they're trending in the right direction. Preston says, any chance Notre Dame gets a commitment or two this week, next 7 days? Preston, I'm not trying to push that. I'm not sure if it'll be within the next 7 days. It wouldn't shock me if they got a commitment or two in the next 7 days, but I'm not going to make that prediction. I think where I'm looking at it is by the end of June, I think they'll have multiple more commitments, and then you could see some kids decide to wait till early July just to kind of have more of a July 4th type of thing. We've seen that in the past. We saw that with Cam Hart and Brendan Clark, for example. But a lot of this stuff, you have to understand the public aspect of the commitments, right? So are you asking me if Notre Dame's going to have a public commitment in the next week or two? I would imagine within the next week or two, yes. Within the next 7 days, will they have public commitments? I don't know about that, but I'm confident that Notre Dame is going to be adding to the class in the month of June. Not all of them are going to be able to go, or not all of them will go public. Just understand that, and we try to talk about that. Diablo Rivera, thanks for joining the show. First catching the show live. I appreciate you being part of the show. It's nice when things come up on Saturday that allow us to talk, so more people can get a part of it. Patrick asks, the concern on him has been speed, correct? Yeah, I think that's the concern. That's the knock. I won't say concern. That's the knock that recruiting analysts have is he is more of a throwback middle linebacker. He's not a guy that, he's not Jalen Snead. He's not Josh Burnham. He's not a guy that's just going to fly around the field 100 miles an hour and that kind of thing. But, this is kind of the debate that I've had with people in the past when you look at a certain player. So like I had this debate with a friend of mine. We were talking about Chris Tyree, and he said, well, Chris Tyree, can't be a 20-plus carry guy. And my response was, well, number one, they don't really nobody really has a plus 20 guy. I think the kid from Georgia, you had Sonny Michel, and I'm drawing a blank on the other running back from Nick Chubb from Georgia. I think his senior year when they went, or was it his junior year, but his last year at Georgia in 2017, I think he carried the ball 20 or more times, like twice that whole year. They played 15 games. But the point I made is you're not recruiting him to be that kind of guy. What you're looking for is, can the player be an impact guy in what you're recruiting him to do? And that used to be a bit problematic back in the day when you didn't have sub packages and teams just kind of stayed in their base defense a lot. And there's always been sub packages. I mean, go back to watch some games from the late 80s and early 90s. You're going to find Notre Dame games where they would have big sub packages, against certain teams. I mean, Miami, they did some of that stuff in '88. But you just had more base defense back then. You needed guys that could do more things. In today's game, you can better mask those type of things. But Bedevo Jr., I don't think you have to mask him. You don't have to protect him. You just have to say, hey, here's what you're recruiting him to do. If you're evaluating him on okay, can he play sideline to sideline or slot to slot, which is more of a realistic explanation of how guys play, well, no, but there aren't a ton of linebackers who can do that. And then you say, well, the guys that can do that, they're going to have issues playing the big boy football in the middle like Junior can do, right? So you could have put Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa at Mike linebacker, and he could be the rangiest middle linebacker in the country. But could he take on guards and do the things you need to do to play big boy football against RPOs and modern run games inside? If you're playing Oklahoma, do you have a Mike linebacker that can step in and just blow your guard up who's wrapping and pulling? Well, that's what you're going to ask Junior to do. If you were to ask Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa to do that, then you'd be misusing him and he wouldn't be as good. So again, with what he's going to be asked to do, I don't think his speed is a question. I think the concern, not the concern, but the thing that I'm focusing on, if I was his high school coach, if I was Marcus Freeman, if I was his parents or whoever else is advising him athletically, I'd say, look, I don't care about you getting your speed down to a 4.4. I don't care about that. He'll never be a 4.4. Here's what I need to make sure that you do. From 0 to 10, you got to be as explosive as possible. You got to have the quickness. You have to be able to explode downhill, because I'm going to be asking you to play from tight end to tight end. Okay. And that just means wherever you'd have a tight end, he needs to be able to attack the outside and in of those formations on a consistent basis. That's not a long way to go, right? So you need to be able to hit those hard and quickly, and you need to be able to plant and redirect. It's that short area quickness. It's that change of direction. Those are the things that I care about. So flexibility, foot quickness, those are things that I'd be focused on improving. I'm not going to be having him in a speed camp trying to get his 40 down. I don't care about his 40 time. I care about what is his 10-yard split would be what I'd care a lot more about. What's his agilities? What's his change of direction? Those type of things I would care a lot more about. So, because again, what are you going to be asking him to do? His speed hurts him if you're going to go put him at a 7-on-7 camp. He's not going to look great at a 7-on-7 camp, but neither would Manti Te'o, right? You're not asking him to do that. You're asking him to be a thumper. And when you look at that part of his game, Junior is as good as anybody in the country, in my opinion, at playing that kind of game. Tommy Leonard says, so Brian, how many more commit articles do you have written at this point in time? I have several more written. I don't know when I'm going to get to publish them. I have several more articles written, and I have several class impact stories written. So hopefully we'll get a chance to get those going here very soon. But like I said, we'll see when these public commitments start to happen. Jonathan, great news. Tommy Leonard, IB Nation, everybody appreciate you being part of it. Tom Balork, Tom's making a great point. This is exactly the same, Tom, and I'm glad you made this comment. So this is Patrick, and this is referring to Patrick's question. Sometimes I tell you, StreamYard really upsets me. But Patrick is referring to a comment that Patrick asked earlier, which, again, now is gone because StreamYard kicked me out, so I lost the early comment. So I'm going to try to find this. So I apologize in advance as I try to get there. But, Patrick asked the question of, is speed sort of the question with him? And I think when you look at it, speed is the question. But as Tom was saying, this is not a kid that you're going to ask to play with long speed, right? This is a kid that you're going to say, to his point, it's that tight end to tight end. So when Tom talks about the inside triangle, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the Mike linebacker. It's tight end to tight end and inside the box. Perfect. Well, very well put, Tom. Very well put. This next question, I'm going to ask for Christopher DeCant. If you had a question before this, it means I can't see it because StreamYard booted me out there's way too many comments and it only goes so far back. So I apologize in advance, but can you please, if I don't get to if you had a comment before this one and you'll see it, can you please resubmit that question? Because I want to be able to answer everybody's questions. I know a lot of people are fired up today. A lot of people are excited about Junior's commitment, rightfully so, and I don't want to miss your question. So if you can resubmit it, I would love it. But Christopher DeCant says, who is the next to commit? Christopher, I don't know who the next public commitment is going to be. I really don't. What I'll say is I could see if Notre Dame pushes. Again, I don't know if they're going to do this, but if Notre Dame pushes for one of the receivers that will be on campus this weekend, and again, I don't have commit stories written on those guys right now, but I'm just saying that if they do say, hey, look, these are guys that we want, we want to push for them, we want to tell them, hey, look, we need you in the class, those type of things, I could see one of those guys popping sooner than some of the other players that Notre Dame has said, hey, go on some visits and things like that before you go public with your commitment. So that is where I could see something happening. And it goes back to Preston's question about somebody in the next 7 days. I think if somebody in the next 7 days commits, it's going to be somebody that's on campus this weekend because it's one of those maybe not higher tier players. It's one of those guys that's waiting for the okay from Notre Dame to go public. And sometimes those guys are wait a little bit longer because you're seeing how the board plays out. Trey McIntosh says he decommitted directly after getting a Notre Dame offer. Why didn't Lee and Kelly offer him earlier? This is huge. Troy, I think part of it is, look, Coach Lee knew he was not coming back this year. And we talked about this before the season started. This was going to be Clark Lee's last year. And that was just a given. And I don't know if he necessarily – and this isn't a knock on him. I would be the same way. If I know I'm not coming back, and I'm a person of integrity, and I believe Clark Lee is a man of integrity, I'd have a hard time recruiting kids to come play for me when I know I'm not going to be there. That can be a really hard thing to do. And so I think that's part of maybe why they didn't make as many hard pushes, why the board wasn't expanded the way that it was. It's hard to even if it's not a conscious thing, it can be a subconscious thing. And then, of course, he was hired by Vanderbilt in December, right? So for like about a month, it was I think it was a little longer than that, wasn't it? Didn't he get hired? I'm trying to remember before the ACC championship game. I could be wrong on that, but he was hired for over a month before Marcus Freeman got here, and so obviously that was another thing. And the other part of it too is Coach Lee, as we've talked about before, was very methodical with his offers. I don't think Junior Tuihalamaka is a guy that fit what Clark Lee is looking for. If you look at the linebackers that Clark Lee signed during his tenure at Notre Dame, really, other than Bo Bauer, there weren't a lot of those kind of pure Mike linebacker type of guys. He usually liked, the guys that are really long and really athletic and those kind of things, and then he would develop a Mike linebacker from those guys. And I don't necessarily – that wouldn't be the way I'd go with it, but it worked for Clark Lee, right? And that's why I say there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever you believe in, recruit to that philosophy, get the best players you can for that philosophy. Clark Lee, I think, tried to do that in his way, and now Marcus Freeman is going to do that in his way. And obviously, in Marcus Freeman's eyes, a guy like Junior Tuihalamaka is one of those types of players, and that's why he went after him, and that's why he was a must get for Marcus Freeman. And like you said, this was he did decommit really. Almost within a couple days, I believe, of Notre Dame offering him. It was clearly, and then Stanford was another one that offered him, and that had an impact too. And the fact that he was looking at Stanford and Notre Dame should tell you a little bit about Junior Tuihalamaka's priorities. It's not just play football, all those type of things. This is also a young man that's intellectual, that's thoughtful, that understands the importance of going to get a great education and being a great football player. And so certainly that's something that he knows what he's getting into at Notre Dame, and that's important. That's very important. Lauren Hamilton asks, with the high number of players in the transfer portal, could you see some teams start only taking 10 to 12 high school players per class and just filling with portal kids? That would be a really unwise decision to that low. Now, Lauren, what I would say is I think the lower tier programs, so if I'm the head coach at Kansas, I'm going to be very attracted to more transfer portal kids than I would be if I was the head coach at Notre Dame, just because I think that that's going to be your opportunity to get maybe 3 or 4 higher level talents than you would otherwise get. If you're Kansas, you're not going to get – if you're UCF, for example, when you use a Notre Dame transfer, you're not going to get Jordan Johnson out of high school. If you're Colorado, you're not going to get Jack Lamb out of high school. They're too good. They're players that are looking at the premier programs. But you have a shot to get those guys when they transfer. And so that's where I see you can maybe see a program like Kansas saying, look, we want to have about 5 extra scholarships a year minimum to be able to use on portal guys, or maybe they might go 7 or 8. But I think going to 10 to 12 for those programs would be dangerous because you can't guarantee what's going to be in the transfer portal. You can't guarantee there's going to be, like in past years, there's been a Joe Burrow in the transfer portal. There's been a Justin Fields in the transfer portal. Well, this year there wasn't that kind of quarterback. There were some good quarterbacks. Notre Dame got, in my opinion, arguably the best transfer quarterback that there was in Jack Cohn. That was a big pickup. But Jack Cohn's not Joe Burrow, or at least what Joe Burrow became. He's not Justin Fields. He's a different kind of player. You can't guarantee that. So if you're going to base your team on getting a transfer portal quarterback, well, some years that's going to work out for you. Other years it's not going to work out for you. Same thing at receiver, same thing at offensive line and all these other positions. You can't guarantee that there's going to be higher level players. You can't guarantee that you're going to be able to get an experienced guy. Like, Notre Dame went after Kane Madden. You can't guarantee that there's going to be that kind of guy every year because let's be honest, if it wasn't for COVID-19, Notre Dame doesn't get Kane Madden because he doesn't have any eligibility left. He has to go to the NFL. So I just feel like you have to, if you're a program like Kansas, maybe Georgia Tech, Indiana, Illinois, programs like that, then yeah, you're going to want to be able to utilize the portal more than I think a Notre Dame should. For me, Notre Dame should look at transfers as, filling short needs. Maybe there's a depth chart like hole here or there. You've got good young players, but they're not quite ready yet. So you bring in a veteran or at least a veteran to challenge. I don't think teams like that should be using the portal to build their roster be the foundation of their roster. You don't see that with Ohio State. You don't see that with Alabama. You don't see that with Clemson. That doesn't mean they don't bring in transfers. They do. But it's to plug little holes here and there. Programs like Kansas, I think it can be more advantageous to you. So it's just part of that too, Lauren. It's a great question, but part of that just depends on what program you're at. And I don't think you're going to see Notre Dame. I hope you don't see Notre Dame become a team that's only bringing a small number. The best way to do it is still to build your own players. The longer a kid is in your system, the better it's going to be. The longer he's into your culture, the better it's going to be. The longer he's in your strength program, the better he's going to be. The longer he's in your academic support system at Notre Dame, the better you're going to be. So for Notre Dame, it's still if you believe that Brian Kelly and his staff are one of the best in the country, right? And I think they are, you want them spending as much time as possible in that system. So give me a freshman, but that's what you got to be careful of, Lauren, is you got to make sure that the guys you're recruiting are guys that you feel will stay through not being early starters. If you're worried about a kid, if you have a kid I'll give you an example. There was a linebacker that Notre Dame was recruiting early who's a very athletic player that a lot of people liked, but he made it very clear that he wanted to start by his first couple years or he was going to transfer. I mean, I literally heard them say that with my own ears. If you're Notre Dame and you look at that kid and you say, that kid's not going to be ready to start his first couple years here, why do we want to bring him in? You don't. You move on to somebody else. A guy like Junior Tuihalamaka, for example. Junior, if he's not starting as a freshman, even as a sophomore, he came to Notre Dame to win a championship, to be a great linebacker, but he also came to Notre Dame because he understands the value of getting a Notre Dame education. He's going to see it through and have a little bit more patience. And that's where Coach Kelly's philosophy of making sure that you're recruiting the family and the kind of player, more than just the talent, is important. And you got to make sure that you're getting the right kind of guy, not just a talented guy. And that's what the staff is doing. And that's what I think this young man is. He is not just a great player, a really good middle linebacker, but he's also a fit for what you're trying to build from a culture standpoint. Hey, Bob 157, Freeman effect. Absolutely. Tommy Leonard says Notre Dame beating Southern Cal again. As Michael Collins said yesterday, just another example of the fact that Notre Dame is USC's daddy. I still was laughing about that last night. It was so phenomenal. Matt D says go Irish. Tyler Robinson, do you think he compares to Manti Te'o? Tyler, yeah, I do. So let's take out the what Manti became at Notre Dame, the runner-up Heisman Trophy kind of guy. Let's take out the high ceiling, that kind of, that Manti's career, and just compare him to what Manti was as a high school recruit. Okay, I think that Junior's a little thicker than Manti was at the same age. I think Manti was more athletic than Junior was at the same age, but I think there's a lot of things that they have in common. I think the instinctive part is something they absolutely have. Manti and Junior have very similar, very smart, instinctive, just make good reads, attack with good angles, things like that. I think Junior got away from that a little bit as a junior. I think he freelanced a little bit more, became a little less disciplined, easy to correct stuff, but very smart, very intellectual player, powerful like Manti was. And I'd say he's even a little bit more instinctive in coverage than Manti was. Manti was just a downhill missile in high school. But overall, I think their games are very similar. If Junior can improve his foot quickness a little bit and streamline his body just a little bit before he shows in Notre Dame, then I think he's going to make a jump and he can be closer to Manti. I view Junior as a top 100 recruit. I view him as in that 75 to 100 range, which is really good. Manti was a top 15, 20 player coming out of high school at worst. I mean, some had him in the top 10, and that's how I would have ranked him if I did rankings back then. So Manti was a little bit of a better prospect at the same age, but from a style of play standpoint, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, I think their games are brothers. I mean, it's like maybe Manti's a little better here, Junior's a little bit better there, but just overall the style of play you're recruiting Junior to do for your defense what Manti did, which is from tight end to tight end. Tom Balork mentioned like the triangle, right? I say tight end to tight end. It's the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. You're asking him to dominate a small part of the field. And I think Junior can do that. I think he could do that. Absolutely. There's no question about it. DJ Wilson, great news. More gap closers to come. Thanks for the news, Brian. The defensive class of 222 is becoming top tier. There's no question about it. I've said for a while that the best part of this class so far has been the defensive ends. Now you're starting to say, okay, linebackers are in that conversation too. You got to start talking about the linebackers being the best part of this class. If they can add Jalen Sneed, then it's going to be the linebackers. Then it's like, okay, the linebacker, Marcus Freeman saying to Mike Elson, okay, I'll see your Tyson Ford, Darren Agu, and Aiden Gaber and Donovan Heinisch, and I'll raise you a Jalen Sneed, right? And so then Mike Elson's got to say, okay, I'm gonna see your Ford. I'm gonna raise you a Cyrus Moss or an Anthony Lucas type of guy. I think that's that fun battle that you have that's making each other great that I want to see, and it's all in the front seven. And look, yes, Notre Dame needs to get better, get more athletes in the secondary. That's an area where Notre Dame has to improve. But I'm a believer that if Notre Dame is going to win championships, they have to dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Have to dominate. Look, you go back to 1988 when Miami was the most athletic program in the country, right? When Notre Dame was beating Miami, yes, Notre Dame had athletes. They had Rocket. They had Todd Light. They had Pat Terrell. They had Stan Smagala, who was a great athlete. They had Ricky Waters. They had great athletes. There's no question about it. But Notre Dame dominated USC in the trenches in those games too. I mean, Steve Walsh in 88 had not been sacked the entire season. Notre Dame got to him multiple times, right? You have to be able to dominate the trenches. I still believe that spread and RPOs and all that stuff is true, right? It's important. But the counter to that defensively is if you can dominate the front seven, that's going to be your opportunity to go win championships. Go look at what Clemson did to Alabama in 2018. I mean, Alabama comes in with this team scoring almost 50 points a game, the best offense in Alabama history up to that point in time. And Clemson just dominated them in the trenches, dominated them. So Tua's rushing throws out. He's making quick reads. He's getting picked off. He's all those kind of things because Alabama could not take advantage of their skill talent. They couldn't utilize their skill talent advantage over Clemson, which I think they had against Clemson's defense, even though Clemson had A.J. Terrell and Mullen, Trayvon Mullen, but safety, I think they had advantages. I think Alabama had the best receiving core in the country by far. You had really good running backs, but they couldn't take advantage of that outside of one long pass to Jerry Jeudy because they were beating Tua up the whole game. Their front four dominated. That's what happened against Notre Dame. Look, if you and I could, if we could all sit down and watch all 22 film at Clemson, and I've done this and I have it. I wish I don't know the rules about it, but we could go through the film and I could show you plays where Chase Claypool's beating the corners at Clemson, and Miles Boykins, I have shown that one, is beating corners at Clemson, and there's plays where Alizé came wide open. There's a play where Michael Young came wide open for what should have been a big play. There was a lot of those opportunities, and part of the reason Ian Book didn't get to those reads is because Clemson was just beating Notre Dame up front, right? And so I still believe that's the key. And for Notre Dame, especially, they have to dominate along the front seven. And what Marcus Freeman is doing in his first class, along with Mike Elston, again, because it's not just Marcus Freeman, it is a staff effort. Marcus Freeman will tell you the same thing. It is a staff effort. Mike Elston will tell you, if I'm going to recruit defensive line at an elite level, yeah, I got to do my job, but I need D coordinator. It's a team thing, right? And that's why you're seeing, as the recruiting coordinator, Mike Elson being really influential in making sure that there's all types of coaches involved with these kids, right? But for Notre Dame, you have to have a great front seven, and you're seeing it right now. Marcus Freeman, they've already got 4 defensive line commits. From a number standpoint, Notre Dame doesn't need another defensive lineman. From a number standpoint, Notre Dame doesn't need another linebacker per se. They want those players because it's high-level players. It's Jalen Sneed, it's Cyrus Moss, it's Anthony Lucas. They want those elite players because he clearly understands, if we're going to beat Georgia in the postseason, if we're going to beat Alabama, if we're going to beat Clemson, if we're going to beat Oklahoma, we're going to beat Ohio State, yes, we need to have great athletes on the perimeter. But if we can't dominate in the trenches, we're not going to win championships and compete for championships on a consistent basis. He clearly gets that, and I absolutely love it. And they are absolutely bringing in, to me, a lot of gap closers in the front seven. Patrick Barnes, I appreciate the super chat, man. I appreciate that very, very much. I appreciate you being part of the show. Every day I listen to you guys. I learn more about Notre Dame football and football scheme in general. Thank you, and you are welcome. I love being able to talk about that stuff. We have a lot of fun doing that here. And as I said, I really, really appreciate you being part of the channel and of course, contributing to the channel. Means a lot to us. It really does. The Kinger 321, wake up the echoes. Absolutely. Christopher says USC is looking up at the Irish. Abs. I love it. Brent Byers, Freeman came in and wrecked shop. He absolutely did. Mike Hoff, what a class this is shaping up to be. Freeman has made all the difference. He has. But again, it's not a one-man show, and Marcus Freeman will tell you that. This is a really good recruiting defensive staff right now, and they work well as a team. That is a beautiful thing. Dave Claroni says, I'm excited for the future. Any day you can stick it to Southern Cal is a good day. I agree completely, buddy. I agree completely. Jordan Schreiber says, huge commitment. Freeman showing the Irish how it's done. It's Freeman's unbreakable belief that's making all the difference. Look, yeah, and here's what it comes down to, Jordan. It's something that we have in this channel have been talking about with you all. You all understand it. Yes, it's tougher to recruit at Notre Dame, but it's doable if you put into work, if you grind, if you can relate to kids, if you can sell kids on what you're doing and it be believable and truthful and do all those things and not be afraid to get told no, not be afraid to lose some battles as long as you can win some of these big ones too. And Marcus Freeman has certainly done that. Mike Elson's doing that, and that's why they're putting together an outstanding defensive class. I mean, right now it's the best defensive class in the country just by sheer numbers alone. You know, there's some schools that Clemson doesn't even have 8 commitments on their whole class, right? Notre Dame's got 8 defensive players committed now. So the key is going to be how they finish, right? You've got to get a big-time safety or 2. You've got to get at least, to me, 1 or 2 more corners. Adding Jalen Sneed to that is going to be important. If you can get one of the 2 stud D linemen, either Cyrus Moss or Anthony Lucas, that would be part of it too, to kind of hang on to that deal, because then it bleeds into next year. Okay. Oh, wow. Look what Notre Dame's doing. I want to be a part of that. John Kasmerick says Freeman 2020, hashtag Freeman 2024. I love the Marcus Freeman love. Absolutely. Cliff Rensberger, best linebacker class in the country so far. Yeah, it's definitely the best linebacker class in the country so far. Cliff, I will say this. If it just ends now, it's going to be one of the 5 best linebacker classes in the country, in my opinion. No question about it. If they want to stay number 1 and have a number 1 class that just nobody's going to surpass, then they need Jalen Sneed. I mean, think about this. If Jalen Sneed commits to Notre Dame, you could make the case that Junior Tuihalamaka is the 3rd-ranked linebacker in this class, behind Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham, or Josh Burnham and Jalen Sneed, depending on how you rank them. The recruiting service is, well, I think 24/7 has Josh Burnham ranked slightly ahead of Jalen Sneed. Rivals has Jalen Sneed ranked way ahead of Josh Burnham. And I think ESPN also has him ranked ahead of Josh Burnham. I personally have Josh Burnham ranked higher than Jalen Sneed, but it's close. And then Junior's not too far behind him, and Nolan Ziegler's not too far behind him. So if they can get Jalen Sneed, and this is what Matty D says, now we need to get Sneed committed, and this could potentially be the top linebacker class of 2022. Matt, I don't think it's potential. I think it would be, and I don't see anybody coming close to that, in my opinion. I mean, you'd have to get Sean Murphy and Harold Perkins in the class to have a shot to be as good as this class, in my opinion. If you're not recruiting those two guys in this class, in your class, and you've got both of them, then I don't think you have a shot to be as good as Notre Dame's if they can get to that next level. So, which means Jalen Sneed. Tommy Leonard says, I get that Freeman wants to be head coach, but the talent he'll be working with will have to be enticing him to stay longer than 2 years. I think that's a very good point, Tommy, is if he feels like, hey, yeah, we did really well these next couple of years, and I'm getting some good offers, but look at the talent we've assembled. I want to see this thing through because that's going to lead me to get even better offers or maybe be at Notre Dame someday. But the thing is, look, smart coaches know that it's not just about getting a head coaching job, it's getting the right head coaching job. Because if Marcus Freeman takes the wrong job in a couple years and it's a place that just it's hard to win there, then he's going to be going back to being a D coordinator within 4 years. That's just how it works, right? Nobody's trying to hire Derek Mason to be a head coach right now, no matter how good of a D coordinator he was, and he was an excellent one. He had to go back to being a defensive coach because he got fired because he went to a place that was hard for a person like him to recruit because he didn't have maybe some of those natural built-in ties that a guy like Clark Lee has as an alum and things like that. So that's kind of where you have to look at it. And Chris says, hope you're feeling better, Brian. I feel fine. My voice is just shot, but I feel fine. Thank you for that, Christopher. I appreciate that very much. Christopher also says offense needs to step up and pull in some gap closers. 100% correct. They had some on campus last week. They've got one gap closer on offense on campus this week that's not already in the class. And then they're going to have some next week. So it's a couple receivers next week that are that way. So hopefully they're able to get that done. Kenny Moore says, Brian, I was over on IB the other day and heard you say in an interview that you were hearing good things about Chris O'Leary on the recruiting trail. Could you go a little deeper? Yeah, I mean, the things that I'm hearing are from recruits and then from other sources is he's super relatable, right? And one of the things that is my fear whenever you hire a coach in his 20s, mid-20s especially, the closer you are in age to players, the more you're going to have in common with them, which can be a good thing. But if you try to be like the players, that's a bad thing because then you become their buddy. You're no longer the coach. And that can be a problem because then you don't have discipline. You don't have their respect. They view you as a buddy. You don't want them to view you as a buddy. You want them to view you as, at the very least, a big older brother that they look up to, that when he says you do this, you do this. Right. And from what I have been told about Chris O'Leary is he relates well to the players. They have a lot in common, but he has been able to do a great job of establishing that, hey, I'm the coach. Right. And I'm not your buddy. I'm here for you. I'm someone who cares about you. I want the best for you. You can come to me with whatever's going on in your life. If it's football related, academic related, home related, girl related, whatever. I'm here for you, but I'm the coach. Right. That's the relationship. And from what I'm told too, is he's really smart and kids pick up on that. And he's not phony. And that's really where that being a young guy can hurt you is, you try to be cool, right? So, I've seen young coaches like walk up to a player and I hear the guy talking one way and then he walks over the players and when he's talking to them or recruits, he starts talking a different way. Players see through that stuff, right? They see that like, man, you're trying to be something you're not. I have heard that Chris O'Leary is very much himself. The players respect him. I think the work he's already done at Notre Dame is something that the current players respect him. So when these kids are visiting campus, I think Chris O'Leary's how he is viewed amongst recruits is going up even more because these recruits are able to talk to the Notre Dame players who say, yeah, we love coach and we respect him and we're excited about him and all those kind of things, which is exactly what I was told by people close to players and players when Chris O'Leary was hired is there was not a like, wait a minute, you hired that guy? He's like, it's like 22 years old, right? Like, seriously? it was great. We love the guy. He pushes us. He's a great coach and all that. And the other thing too, Kenny, is he works, from what I'm told. He's on the phone. He's talking to a lot of kids. He gets after it. He builds relationships with parents. He's building relationships with players. He's doing what he needs to do. So, I mean, so far he's checking all the boxes, Kenny, except he just doesn't have anybody in the class yet. But I think that'll come in time. But I mean, that's really, I mean, the only thing you can knock him for so far is just the lack of actual, proven success in that. That can be determined from who you get, right? He hasn't signed anybody, but it's June 19th. I'm not worried about that too much. We need to see him close at some point in time, and that's going to be the final thing, right? Can he close? Okay. But up to that, other than that, I've heard nothing but great things about Chris O'Leary from all types of different sources. And to me, Kenny, that's important. You have to not just hear from players, but you need to hear from parents. You need to hear from high school coaches. You need to hear from a lot of different people that they're all kind of saying the same thing. And especially inside and outside the program, you're likely to get a bit of a positive spin when you're talking to people inside the program. But when you're hearing it from people that maybe don't have the reasons to kind of give you the sunny side of it only, you start really feeling good about it. And that's where I'm at with Chris O'Leary at this point in time. Ian Timmerman, because Freeman's defense is so multiple and switches between different formations, when they switch between 4-2-5 and 3-3-5, does the Viper position move to Sam? No, the way that they've done it is the Viper just bumps back and he is essentially becomes the will, is what we've seen. And then how they handle it then, I've seen it handled a couple ways. Okay, so there's two different ways they could do it, Ian. If they do it without switching personnel, so if they do it out of their 4-2-5 personnel, then what you're going to see is like the Viper, for example. So let's say it's Isaiah Foskey. You're going to see the three techniques. So let's say Jason Adamiola is going to bump out to defensive end. You have Myron Tungavaloa at the big end, and then you have Kurt Heinisch at the nose, right? And then all of a sudden Isaiah Foskey stacked behind Jason Adamiola. And then your two inside backers are going to be, your Will and your Mike are going to be there in the 3-3 stack. And then your rover will be the overhang player. The other way you can do it is to drop that guy off and say, okay, you're going to have Foskey back there, but you want, because the reason you may want to drop him off and not bring in a true linebacker is because you still may be blitzing him. So you want to be able to, you're just basically what you're doing in that situation is you're giving yourself freedom to move him around and not just be lined up off the edge. So you may blitz him inside. You could even bring him off. You could do a lot of different things with him where you can move him around depending on the matchup. If you want to sub out a linebacker, then you can kind of have Foskey there and another inside linebacker, and instead of a rover, you can bring in a nickel. But when I broke down Marcus Freeman's defense, he almost always kept the rover in the game. Now, that could have just been because he had a lot of faith in the kid that did that. And so when he'd go to 5 DBs, he just bumped the rover inside, and the rover would play, kind of like we saw it against Georgia. He just brought the safety down, and they were in their 4-3 personnel, brought the safety down, played single high, and you still had the rover splitting the difference between the slot and the tight end. And so you can obviously do that. So you're still in that, you're still in that 4-3 personnel. The other thing you can do is you can take the Viper out or take one of the defensive ends out or defensive tackle. Like maybe you can take out Kurt Heinisch, you can take out Adamiola or Tungavaloa, leave Foskey or Botelho as one of the edge players, and then just bring in an extra linebacker. That's another way to do it. So it just depends on I would imagine matchup situations. If it's a 1st and 10, you're not going to sub out a Viper. If it's 1st and 10, maybe if it's a 3rd down and they're going tempo, you may bump the Viper back so you can move them around based on the call. So I hope that kind of answered the question. I kind of went a little around all that, but that's kind of where we're looking at. Jonathan says, whoa, Skalski is legit. But what I'm saying is like, that's the kind of that pure Mike. I mean, Skalski's a Mike linebacker, right? And he was able to really dominate the Notre Dame run game because he was so aggressive and so downhill and so instinctive. Not having him in the first game, Notre Dame runs all over Clemson. You put him and Tyler Davis back in the defense the next game, and all of a sudden Notre Dame can't run the ball in Clemson. And that's the kind of impact I believe that we can see with a guy like Junior Tuihalamaka. Tommy says 44. That was my number in high school. I know he switched to 5 though. Yeah, he switched to 5 as a junior, but I think switching to 5 should have told you something. All righty. Kenny Moore says closer to Ray Maialuga than Manti. I'd say that's only true athletically. Kenny, I would not agree with that necessarily for style of play. I think Maialuga was a bit more of a less disciplined than Manti, less instinctive. I don't think Maialuga was a very instinctive player. I think that's why I say I maybe compare him to body type and maybe athletically, but I don't think he compares to Niuafe skill set wise, because I think he's so much more instinctive, and that's why he reminds me so much of that kind of guy. Mike Robbins says, as a senior, Jalen Smith was sideline to sideline and a thumper, but again, that's a rare dude, right? There aren't many guys like that. You don't. Roquan Smith was that way in high school. The number of guys that are like that, you could probably count on one hand that can be 230 plus and be physical, but also run. And those guys are rare. There's no one in the current class that's Jalen Smith for anybody. Not Sean Murphy, not Harold Perkins, none of those guys. Matty K 55. Let's go. I'm excited for this. I hope this is the first domino of many to fall this summer. I believe it is. I think if it doesn't happen, then some things have gone terribly wrong, but I think this is going to be the first of many. Larry says, great news for the program. I agree, Larry. Dylan Riggins, so excited for this commitment. He's going to be living highlight reel. Nate Van Slyke, I think Nate is new to the channel, or at least first time commenting. He says, let's go. I have a lot of excitement for this one. Liam Gaming reminds everybody before you leave to hit the like button and the subscribe button and the notification bell. And then Ryan Haley says, Brian, after seeing Junior commit today, do you see Jalen Sneed committing soon as well? I mean, I'm not going to say he is or isn't, because that's not my place. That's Jalen's news to break. All I can say is I think Notre Dame has put themselves in as good a position as possible with Jalen Sneed, that when he makes his decision, which I do expect to be in the next couple weeks, if he does stick to that, I do feel Notre Dame's in a great place. And now they just got to finish it off and close him and get him to, and make sure that when he goes public that his feelings are still pretty good about your program. Let's see, we got some more questions. Searcher Green, Junior was my number one guy in his class. If I smoked, this would be a cigar moment. Yes, absolutely. I've had a few cigars in my days, usually after football games we won. But if I was a smoker, I would be lighting up a cigar today too. My wife would make me go outside and do it, but I'd be lighting up a cigar today. David Knight's choice would be some Jameson on ice with Guinness. Kenny Moore says Anthony Lucas is his number one guy. I get that. All righty. Liam Gaming says, glad it's on a Saturday with recruits on campus. There's no doubt, Liam. And look, you've got a couple guys on campus. You've got a West Coast guy. I count Las Vegas as West Coast. And Cyrus Moss. I mean, you don't think Junior's going to be getting in touch with Cyrus Moss soon if he hasn't already? You've got Xavier Niuafe saying, this front seven that they're putting together in front of me is looking pretty good. I wouldn't mind playing with that group. Those things, I think that's where it snowballs. And you say, maybe you wouldn't have got this guy if you didn't get these other guys first. And that's kind of where you need to be. Jonathan Kasmerick says, I feel like we need to nab another highly rated D tackle like we did with Rubio last year. I would tend to agree with that. Now, I think you could also say that did you see pictures of Tyson Ford from his visit recently? That guy may already be in the class. That is a huge, huge kid. And it's good big. I mean, he said he was 6'6", 260. I was like, yeah, that's kind of big, I don't know if that's going to be good. And then you see pictures of him from his Notre Dame visit, and you're like, okay, Tyson's, I mean, he's the closest thing I've seen to Stephon Tuitt from a physical build standpoint. I'm not saying he's Stephon Tuitt. I'm just saying, like, you look at his body type, he's just big head, broad shoulders, big calves, big arms, big chest. I mean, he's just a big boy, and he's not done growing, and he's already 260. So he could end up being that guy. If they were to get Lucas in the class, I mean, it's not out of the question that Lucas could be more of a Jason Adamiola, obviously type of player, but you could also see maybe Tyson Ford being that kind of guy, and Anthony Lucas could be more like Myron Tungavaloa. You could see that if Tyson Ford continues to blow up the way that he has. And Brent Byers says, I have to put Sneed, Lucas, or Niuafe as number one. That's because they're uncommitted. I think he says realistic shot to land all three. Realistic shot to land all three. I think it would be a bit of an upset if they did get all three. Christopher says Niuafe is number one for me with Hamilton leaving to the NFL after this season. Brent Byers says Niuafe would be the perfect bridge to safety. See, we've already moved past Junior Tuihalamaka. I like where you guys are at. What's next? I'm digging it. Dylan Riggins says, I was mowing my lawn and instantly stopped and remembered to check my phone. Let's freaking go, baby. Yes, that's That's a great excuse to stop mowing your lawn, Dylan, to come in and check out a podcast from Notre Dame getting a big-time recruit. Tommy Leonard says, I've been holding off housework for this also. That's great. Matt D, I'm excited for Marcus Freeman. He is building a group of potential beasts at the linebacker position. Hopefully convince Xavier during his visit to seriously consider Notre Dame. Absolutely. Jack Foote asks, are Tackett, Curtis, and Sonny Styles linebacker targets, or would we consider them safety targets? They're both linebacker targets, like rover linebacker targets. Sonny Styles, a lot of people have talked about. We know about him. He's 6'4", 6'5", over 200 pounds now. I think he's going to be huge. I think he's going to end up being at the very least a rover, but potentially a guy that can move inside. Tackett Curtis, if you have not watched his film, you've got to check that kid out. Look, if Notre Dame, right, if they get Jalen Sneed, I'm going to have an article out a couple days after talking about my top guys in the 2023 class, and Tackett Curtis will be in that conversation. That kid is a missile. If you have not seen him, you got to check him out. He is really, really athletic and really good. You got to check him out. Sean Rogers says, now close Sneed, and it will be an amazing linebacker haul. Yeah, I agree, Sean. It's already right now the best linebacker haul in the country. There's a chance maybe a team or two could pass the current group by the time you get a signing day. But if you get Jalen Sneed, nobody's passing that linebacker court. Nobody. Tom, can Coach Freeman help out with offensive recruiting? I just think that they just got to keep grinding, right? The guys are on the board for them to have a really good class. I mean, if they can get Tobias, and I think if they do the right things, they can get Tobias, they can get Xavier Bradshaw. You know, you put them with the tight ends. I mean, Jadarian Price, you know, they have a chance to be a really good offensive class. They just got to close on the right guys. That's going to be the key. Sean Rogers, Southern Cal equals little brother. Apparently, it equals your child, according to what Michael Collins said yesterday, which was phenomenal. All right, Matt D says he's the guy talking about that will rock you in the run game if you try to run up the middle. Talking about Tuihalamaka, and that's exactly what he's being recruited to do. And that's the thing, is you have to evaluate players, in my opinion, for what they're being recruited to do, right? And say, well, you know, he can't do this. Well, he's not being recruited to do that, so it doesn't matter. You can't really ding him for it because he's not being recruited to do that. That's like saying, well, Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa can't line up at defensive end and take on, you know, tackles. Well, so what? It's not what he's being recruited to do, right? What is he being asked to do, and can he dominate in those areas? And I think Junior can be that. Mike Huff says, I know it's talked about a lot, but can the Irish really have a top 5 class in 2022? Absolutely. And I don't even think they have to bat 1,000 from this point out, Mike. I mean, look, if they get Jalen Sneed in the next week or two, that's going to bump them up to number 2. Now, there's a lot of schools that haven't, you know, that Clemson has like 7 kids in their class, right? They're going to add a lot more kids, especially for the points-based system. But, you know, if Notre Dame can get it to Tobias Merriweather and a CJ Williams and Xavier Bradshaw, if they can add at least one more highly ranked offensive lineman, if they can add, you know, Jalen Sneed, if they can add Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore, and if they can add a Xavier Nwankpa and a Jake Pope, and, you know, hopefully like maybe even one more defensive lineman, Lucas or Moss. I mean, that is a no-brainer. Not only is it a top 5 class, I think that's bound to be a top 3 class. I did a mock class the other day because 247 Sports has this class calculator thing, and then I did one for Rivals. And if they get like the guys I just talked about, it would be like the number 3 class in the country of like 4 of the last 5 years. Second or third best class in the country, like 4 of the last 5 years. That got them like 25 guys because you only count the top 20. So yeah, they have a chance to be that. There's no question, Mike. Now they got to finish, right? They got to finish. That's the thing, is they've got to close at a high level. They got to close like the elite programs close. That's the key. But they're in a better place now than they have been in a very long time for that. And I'll have some stuff coming out about this week. Tommy Leonard says, do you think he's a 2-down linebacker his first year or two? So possibly, Tommy, but here's the thing. The thing I think you can use a guy like him in is if you don't want to always sub him out on third down, or he's a guy that you can use as a blitzer. I think he's a pretty good blitzer. The timing he shows against the run, we've seen that. I've seen that in game film in the past game. I think he's a guy that you can line up on the edge, especially if you're in a 3-down front. He's a guy you can line up off the edge and rush off the edge. I mean, I think he can do those kind of things because the fact of the matter is in today's game, you can't just be a 2-down linebacker because so many teams are going to throw on first and second down. You have to at least be able to hold your own in the pass game. And that's my thing with juniors. He's not going to pick off 7 passes like Manti did, but he can hold his own in the pass game. If you're putting him in matchups where he can be successful, maybe checking backs, but then be more of a zone guy and things like that. I certainly think he can do that. But I would just use him to come after the quarterback. If I'm in a 3-man front, especially, I would just use him to hammer the quarterback and to attack the line of scrimmage. Robert Butcher says, if this would happen, if this prompt Cheeks to call and want to commit, what happens to Snead? Robert, that ship has sailed. Notre Dame has moved on from Sebastian Cheeks. He was supposed to be on campus this weekend. Notre Dame canceled that visit. They're all in on Jalen Snead. So if they don't get Jalen Snead, they're going to only sign 3 linebackers. But I really like where Notre Dame is at with Jalen Snead. Alec Ganser, it's a good question. How would you rank the linebacker commits? How about if they get Snead? So here's how it would be right now. I'll just tell you who would be with all 4. And then you can just remove Snead from that to figure out who the top 3 are. But based on my grades right now, and again, I have 8 categories that I use to grade players out. Based on how my grades are right now, I have Josh Burnham 1. Slightly behind him at number 2 is Jalen Snead. Then number 3 is Junior Tuihalamaka. And number 4 is Nolan Ziegler. Ziegler has the 3rd highest ceiling of the 4. I have Junior as the lower ceiling of the group, but he's probably arguably at the highest floor of the group, in my opinion. So there's a counter to that. But that's how I would rank the linebacker classes. So Burnham number 1, Snead would be number 2, Tuihalamaka would be number 3, and Ziegler would be number 4, based off sophomore and junior film. Obviously, that could change after senior seasons, but where we are right now. Brent Byer says, of course, Notre Dame can have a top 5 class, but they have to do big work to get there. Definitely possible. And that's exactly right, Brent. Exactly right. All right. Domerson's Birth has a 2-part question we'll get to here real quick. He says, number 1, thoughts on the timing this public commitment during yet another big Notre Dame recruiting weekend, or was it just the best timing for Junior? I'll answer that part first. This has been his plan for a while. I think it was 247 Sports first reported like a couple months ago that he wanted to make a decision on his dad's birthday. Today is his dad's birthday. So this decision was about Junior's timing, which is why he didn't go public much sooner with his commitment to Notre Dame. Part of that was he wanted to take visits, which is smart. I think that's very smart for kids to at least see one other campus. But the other part was he wanted to commit on his dad's birthday. And I think that's a pretty awesome birthday present to give to your dad, is to commit to a program like Notre Dame. And I would say that if you committed to any other big-time program, it's not just Notre Dame, but obviously Notre Dame is one of those big programs. But for us in this room, obviously that's a pretty big deal. But this was more about Junior's timing. And now it doesn't hurt, and you can use it to your advantage if you're in Notre Dame coaching staff. But this was not part of Notre Dame's strategy to get him committed this weekend. It was not. This was about Junior. And the second part of the question, it says, I know Notre Dame doesn't rush commitments during visits, but do players, schools ever sync up timing in the public commitment in public commitments? Yeah, a lot. They do that a lot. Yeah. Sometimes it's going to be like, hey, let's hold off because we want this other kid to commit, and so he's in the class before you go commit. It's something, things like that. Or hey, let's wait until you may have it, like you said, like a big recruiting weekend or something like that. They'll work together on those things all the time. And sometimes it's the kid saying, hey, like, coach, I want to sign, but I don't want to announce the signing until, I do my thing. So, for example, Isaiah Foskey signed with Notre Dame in December of the part of the 2020 class. He signed with Notre Dame in December. Notre Dame didn't announce him as part of the signing class, even though he had signed, until he did it, because he wanted to do a thing with his high school. He wanted to commit with his teammates in high school at De La Salle. So Notre Dame kept that to themselves and honored that. The same thing happened with Equanimous St. Brown. Now, he didn't sign in December because there wasn't an early signing period, but Equanimous committed to Notre Dame in like November. But he didn't go public with it until January because he wanted to do it at one of the All-Star games. So Notre Dame will work with kids on stuff like that all the time. There's no question about that. Mike Hoffs, can the Irish have a top 5 class? Really? I think we addressed that a little bit earlier. Absolutely, they can. Tommy Leonard says, dogs want to play with dogs, right? This has to help with Niuafe and Lucas. I think so. I think so. John DeCrisio says, I am sure your number one want for defense is Anthony Lucas. Who is your number one want for the offense now? Probably Tobias Merriweather is probably my number one on offense. That's kind of been true for a while from a skill player standpoint. The number one lineman I wanted was Jake Taylor. They're not going to get him. But I'd say if we're talking best player impact, position of need, and all that, it'd be Tobias Merriweather. My number 2 would probably be Xavier Bradshaw. That's my 1-2 there. Yeah, and then I'd say probably Dallin Hayden would be next, and followed by probably CJ Williams. That'd be my dream close offensively from a skill player standpoint. If they can finish with Dallin Hayden, Tobias Merriweather, CJ Williams, and Xavier Bradshaw, not only are you landing a lot of difference makers, but you're also, you're solidifying that top 5 ranking. There's no question about it. Look, I'll say this, John, about that too is, and this isn't what you're asking, but it leads to me to this point is, I'm more confident in the ability of the Notre Dame staff to land top-ranked players if they make the right choices at the skill positions than I am the offensive line right now. What I mean by that is Notre Dame may not make the right choices in my opinion only, and they wouldn't agree with that, but in my opinion, if they could get Nicholas Anderson and the kid from Canada and all that, they could get those guys and then maybe add them with Tobias Merriweather, and that's their class. They could get that. To me, that would be a poor decision, but that was their choice. It wasn't that they had to settle on those guys. It was their choice. You can just argue with the choice, whether it's the right or wrong choice. If they make the push, I think they can definitely get Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw, and then you try to close on CJ Williams. That would be, I think I have greater confidence that they are going to do that if they make the choice to do that, and that'd be the right choice to do that. Then if they were then to be able to say to get Billy Schrauth, Carson Hinsman, and like Joe Bruner or another top tackle. I'm more confident with where they stand with the skill players if they make the right choices than I do the offensive line, which should give you some hope that they're going to be able to get a good offensive class. Anthony Solomon says, thanks for dropping in, and getting some quality information on the young man for us. This stuff is why I left one group to join this group. I appreciate it, Anthony. We are happy to have you part of our team, buddy. This is fun to do. Right? It's a Saturday afternoon, right? I'm going to have to go mow the lawn later, right? Unlike Dylan, I waited to plan till after this one came out, so I'm going to do a little mowing later. But this is a community we're excited about building, and things like this are these are the fun parts of the job, right? It's great news. Everybody's coming in excited. It's a lot of fun. There's no question. Technical technician Jalen Sneed's cover skills are incredible. Pure rover. Move Prince Collie inside. It's the right move. I'm going to somewhat push back. I'm not going to say I disagree with you per se. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Number one, we've seen his cover skills be incredible at camps. It still needs to translate to football. Because here's the thing. At a 7-on-7, you have no run read. You're just covering. There's no run read, right? That's the one drawback to 7-on-7s. But just because he could be an elite rover doesn't mean you don't move him somewhere else, right? There's also a great need to have a great cover player, Will. There's a great need to have a great cover player, Mike. You have to look at it and say, okay, let's say Jalen Sneed is a better rover than Prince Collie is. Let's just, for argument's sake, to your point, let's say that's true. But what if he's also a better Will than Prince Collie would be? I'm not saying he's either of those. I'm not saying that. I'm just making a point here, right? If he's a better Will than Prince Collie, then you have to make your decision. Where's it more important to have the player be his best? And to me, it would be Will. I still think that's the most important, Michael. That's more important than the rover. You can live without a rover. I don't think you can live without two really good inside linebackers in this defense. Now, to your point, could he end up staying a rover? Absolutely. But I'm trying to let it play out. And I'm a big believer that if you have guys like them, like Nolan Ziegler, that could potentially be a rover, I always want to start those guys out a rover and see if they can stick. And if they can't, then you move them inside. Or if an opportunity emerges inside, you move them inside. That's what I would do. Old Grim says, I want to see the offense step up now. I agree with that. Brent Byers, I appreciate these kind words. By far the best source of Notre Dame content. It isn't close. I appreciate that. All right, Garth Cassidy. Okay, let me see the first part of your question, Garth. I know Garth Cassidy says, are the bat signals only going out on the defensive side of the ball? And then he follows up down here and says, because I did not see any offensive side of the ball send out bat signals. I thought they did for Holden Stace, but I could be wrong. I know they sent him out for Kane Madden when there was the bat signals, and then Cade Madden and Donovan Heinisch committed the same day. The night before that, I asked some folks who that was for, and I was told that it was for Kane Madden. But I don't think the offensive staff has landed anybody in a while, right? I mean, Holden Stace was the last commit they had on offense, right? And when was that? I mean, that was kind of right when – it was right around when he was committing to Notre Dame, correct? I'm trying to look and see the timeline. He committed Notre Dame on May 8th, so they haven't had an offensive commitment since, I believe, May 8th. Could be wrong on that, but – Ian Timmerman says, longtime listener, first-time commenter, because I usually don't get to watch the live show, but love the show. Do you think this influences Snead or Lucas in a positive way? Snead, I don't think it influences them because I think that there's already – I don't think it's going to influence Snead. I think Snead knows what he wants to do. It may solidify his decision, but I don't think it's going to make it. Lucas, yeah, I think this can influence Lucas, absolutely. Will it? I don't know. I think at the end of the day, these kids are going to make whatever decision they think is best for them. But I do think things like this help. I mean, they're like little notches, right? And you get enough of those little notches right, Ian, then you're going to have a shot to really get it done. And to me, that I think things like this can certainly help. And I'll say this: if they get Tuihalamaka, I think Jalen Snead will make his decision way before Anthony Lucas does. If it works out well for Jalen Snead from a Notre Dame standpoint, will that then also help with Anthony Lucas? Yeah, it's just little pickups after little pickups, and all of a sudden you add it all up, and you're like, yeah, this is where I got to be. My voice is starting to go a little bit, so I'm going to try to get through these last questions and wrap up before it completely goes away, so I apologize. Brent Byer says, I'm really intrigued to see what Amorian Walker does his senior season. That kid is on fire. He's tall, long, and silly fast for that size. Think he may really shoot up the rankings. Again, we just got to see what he does on film, Brent. I mean, we talk about that, it seems, every show now, but, I mean, he's on fire based on he's getting offers. He has not played any football, right? I mean, so let's let him play. But I hope he does. I really hope he goes out there senior year. He's healthy. He shows speed. He starts stretching the field and dominating down there, and that'd be awesome. That'd be great for Notre Dame. If he can be kind of like a Justin Ross type of player for Notre Dame, that'd be phenomenal. I got to just see it first. That's all. Matt D, he agrees with Brent Byers at 100%. Best content and breakdown of the team and their commits. You know what, Matt? I'm going to tell you this because you brought it up. You've known me for a while. You know who actually originally came up with Irish Breakdown? The name was actually my wife. So she's she does graphic design. She builds websites. She does redesigns websites. She builds logos and all that kind of stuff. And when I first left my previous place of employment and we started Irish Maven, that's all the names were called Maven at first when we came over with SI. And so we were starting a podcast, and I wanted to know what I wanted to call the podcast because I wanted the podcast to kind of be independent of the website to a degree. I mean, there's always time together, and I want people to read the website all the time. Of course, that's still where I make the most money is on the website, not YouTube or the podcast. We'll make twice as much money right now, if not 4 times as much money in some months on the website than we do the podcast. But I wanted to kind of have its own thing. And so we were talking through it, and it was actually my wife that first talked about that name, and it just stuck. It just seemed perfect because, again, what are we all about here, right? We break down film, right? We're breaking down the game. And she's like, what about Irish Breakdown? And I was like, that's phenomenal. It's great. So my wife actually came up with that. It was her idea because she's like, well, what are you trying to do? And so I explained to her. She said, what about Irish Breakdown? So that's where Irish Breakdown came from. And then eventually I convinced the people at SI I wanted to change my name from Irish Maven, Irish Breakdown, and it stuck. So it's been really good. DJ Wilson asks, is the mic or Will the signal caller, or does it depend on the player? Usually it's the mic, because he's kind of, in the middle of the defense. But nowadays, everybody has to be able to make calls. And the difference is the mic is making more bigger picture calls first, and then also front calls. But the will have to make some calls too, whether it be out to the corners, whether it be to the end. he may make a check where, if the end's going to come in and he's going to go out on the stunt, he may see something that on film says, hey, you know what, you got to go out now. I'm going to crash inside. So you make the call and those type of things. But as far as like when you're talking about like the signal caller, like who's making the play, it's the mic. But honestly, DJ, the mic is nowadays, the way it works now is the mic is reiterating what's coming in from the sideline. It's defense is a lot like the offense is they're signaling in the play and everybody's got to see it. And then the mic reiterates that call to make sure that everybody got it and make sure everybody's on the same page. But the primary signal caller now is actually coming from the sideline, very much like we see on offense, which when teams are going tempo and teams are doing that offensively, you don't have time to huddle and get the call in and those kind of things. You got to be able to go and everybody's got to get the call. That's why you see like multiple coaches making calls. Now there's always a dummy signal caller, but a lot of times they're all kind of doing different things and saying different things. Let's see. Brent Byers, why is the QB always calls the mic on every play? So essentially one of the base protections, pass protections that teams use is called a mic protection. And essentially what a mic protection is in a 4-down defense, the offensive line is going to account for the mic and the 4-down lineman. And then if the running back is going to be part of it on a check release, he is going to then have, depending on which direction the call is going, he's going to have inside out from the linebackers. So if you line up and you're in a 4-down defense and you've got the will to the quarterback's left and the mic to the quarterback's right, the center and the quarterback who will do it. Some teams just the quarterback or just the center will do it for the line, and then the quarterback's making the call. So that way the running back knows who the mic is. And so essentially the line has to account for the 4-down lineman and the mic. It's called a mic protection, right? So you're identifying the mic. Now, you don't have to get the mic because he's the mic. It's about how you're setting your protection. So you may say, hey, look, we're treating this guy as the mic because we're sending our protection that way, and the mic linebacker's over here, and we're blocking this way. So you're technically blocking the will, but you're treating him as the mic, right? Otherwise, everybody know the number 44 is the mic. It's not necessarily who's lined up a mic. It's who are you identifying based on their front as the mic. And the same thing if you're in a 3-down front, so that he'll identify the mic, and so the mic will tell you, okay, you're taking these 3-down linemen plus the mic, and we know that guy's part of it too. And that's where sort of you've got to have some other communication. And then, so if you're in a 4-down lineman, right? So let's say you've identified the mic linebacker, okay? And in some looks, especially in the 4-2-5 look, a lot of times it won't even be the mic that you're identifying. It's actually the will, but you're setting it's the mic. Then we're treating him as the mic. And then your running back is, if he's to the right and you're taking the mic to the left of the offense, the running back has to check inside out. So he's going to get his eyes. He'll actually get his eye on the technical mic, but the guy that the line's not accounting for, if that guy blitzes, he's got to pick him up. And if the outside guy blitzes too, that's on the quarterback, right? If the inside guy doesn't blitz and the outside linebacker blitz, the running back scans from inside out. Inside linebacker's not coming. Outside linebacker's coming. I got to pick him up. If neither of them come, he's got to quickly see that and get out on his check. Okay, so it's identifying who is part of the protection. What linebacker are we identifying as the responsibility of the line to pick up, which then lets the line know who they're picking up. But then it also is going to identify who they're not picking up, because then the quarterback and the running back are accountable for those players that are not being picked up. So I hope that explains it. Lauren says, thanks for the detailed answer. Love the show. Thank you for that, Lauren. And as a reminder, Lauren asked about teams maybe deciding to bring in fewer high school players and focusing more on transfer portal guys. So it's a very good question. And look, Lauren, there's a lot of people asking that question. You're just savvy enough to ask it in the show, but I get asked that a lot. You'd be surprised how much I ask this. I mean, a lot of people want to know that answer. So it's a very good question. I appreciate you asking it. Preston says, are you worried that Notre Dame could take these B-level wide receivers instead of waiting for some of the top guys, or do you have faith that they will be patient, wait it out? To be honest with you, I don't have patience. I don't have faith that they're going to wait it out and do it. I'm hopeful, right? I'm hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, so to speak. And then we'll have to hear the spin of, well, they actually like this guy better than that guy and all that other kind of stuff. So not faith. I don't have a lot of faith it's going to happen. I hope it's going to happen. And if they are patient and let it play out and bring in the right guys, I will praise them to high heaven. There's no doubt about that, but we'll just have to see if that plays out or not. Christopher DeCan asks, Anthony Lucas taking more official visits. Yes, he's definitely going to go to Bama. He may actually be there this week, and I'm not quite sure his schedule. And I believe he's also going to get to Miami at some point in time as well. Sid Irish says, I don't feel great about Lucas. We'll see. It's going to, like I said, it's going to be tough, but I think Notre Dame is in a good place right now. We'll see how it goes after all the visits are over, right? That's what I've been saying for a while. We have to let these visits play out first. Let's see here. Alex Ganser says, personally, I feel that Freeman will be able to overcome Ohio State for Xavier Niuafe. Tom Loy has mentioned recently that Ohio State is very nervous. What is your opinion on this? Hey, look, Alex, this is what I've been saying for a while, and I've been feeling good about this for a while in what I'm saying, which is Ohio State was his leader coming into the month. The fear that you had if you're Notre Dame was – so it's kind of – the nervousness has been reversed. The first fear was Notre Dame, which is he visits Ohio State and they convince him to pop and he never makes it to your campus. And what we said in May was if you make it out of that visit uncommitted and you get him to campus, you've got a puncher's chance. And I think now that's where Notre Dame's nervousness is coming from, or Ohio State's nervousness is coming from, because they couldn't get him to commit. He's now he visited Texas A&M. He's now visiting Notre Dame. They know, look, there's enough people at Ohio State that are familiar with Notre Dame, whether it be Tony Alford, who coached here, or other coaches who have sent, like Kerry Coombs was a high school coach for a long time. He knows what Notre Dame's about as a high school coach that sent kids here. I believe Kerry Coombs was, I could be wrong about this, but I thought Kerry Coombs was Jarrett Grace's high school coach, but perhaps he had left by the time Jarrett Grace went there, because from Coleraine. And so he was there for a long time. So he knows what Notre Dame is about. There's enough coaches there that know what Notre Dame's about. They know what Xavier Niuafe about. They know Marcus Freeman. And they're like, yeah, we're nervous about that. So, yeah, I could see that. I don't know if they're nervous or not. I haven't paid attention to it. But if Tom's saying that Ohio State's nervous, then I believe it. I know Ohio State's nervous, and I can understand why they're nervous. Because this is what we've been saying for a month, right, is Notre Dame had to put in the work to make sure he didn't commit to Ohio State and that you get him on campus. Because I think Xavier's a kid that will fit well at Notre Dame. I think he's going to like Notre Dame. Getting him a chance to meet Kyle Hamilton for the first time face-to-face. Getting him a chance to meet Marcus Freeman and Chris O'Leary face-to-face. Saying what makes Notre Dame unique. Xavier strikes me as the kind of kid that's going to really be attracted to Notre Dame. And then the need. Here's the deal. Ohio State wants Xavier Niuafe just as bad as Notre Dame does. But if you're Xavier, who needs you more? It's Notre Dame. It's not even close. And I think that could maybe be something that sends him over the edge. Kevin Thomas says, would you say that the particular offensive lineman you mentioned is trending more towards another place, or is it just closer than previously thought? Neither is necessarily true, Kevin. It's more just about, I figured this to be done by now. And the fact that it's not done by now has me a little bit concerned. It could just be that the kid is just taking his time and is in no rush for whatever reason, but the staff already knows where things stand. But the fact that he hasn't done it, coupled with the fact that they're throwing out more offers and they're bringing in kids for visits that, we wouldn't otherwise think should be coming in for visits, has me a little nervous about what's happening on the offensive line. John Rich says, great move making the call to the Burnhams to have Josh make the trip to South Bend to sell the program. This will be an exciting band of Irish brothers. There's no question about it. And Josh is back on campus this weekend. If you didn't see, there was an interview he did with Tom Lemming, him and Nolan Ziegler, and that was on campus in Notre Dame. So that was pretty cool deal. The real godfather of recruiting is interviewing those guys, and so they're on campus this weekend as well, which is a great move. Because again, Josh Burnham carries some weight because he is a highly ranked kid. He's not just a local kid, right? I mean, he is a top 100 player, and so you get him on campus with these other kids, and it's like, okay, this guy's a dude, and he's a big kid, an athletic kid, and it's got some personality to him, and and Notre Dame had to sell him. He's not like Nolan's a great kid, great player, and all that, but Nolan's doesn't have the ranking that Josh does, which fair or not, it just that stuff matters to young people. But more importantly, Nolan grew up a Notre Dame fan. Like that was a given. So his view on Notre Dame is going to be different than a kid that maybe grew up a Notre Dame fan. Josh Burnham isn't that way. Josh had to be convinced that Notre Dame was the right place for him, and they're sold, they're bought in now, but it was a process to get there. The process for Nolan Ziegler to get to Notre Dame was, are you going to offer or not? And once they offered, there was nowhere else he was going to go, which I love that about the kid. So I think, but for a lot of these recruits that aren't that way, Josh Burnham's going to be a little bit more relatable. Plus, he's the higher ranked player. So I think that's great to have. I mean, he's been on campus the first 2 weekends. That's been great. I mean, just great. And there's a lot of Notre Dame commits on campus this weekend with Xavier Wongpa and Cyrus Moss as well, and Nicholas Singleton as well. Steve Angeli's on campus. The 2 tight end commits, Eli Raridan and Holden Stace, are also on campus. All right, let's get some more questions here and wrap this up. You guys are bringing the fire today with the questions. I love it, but it's just my voice is about to die. All righty here. Let's see here. All righty. Troy McIntosh says, I missed this, but why didn't Lee offer junior? I don't know if he was necessarily – this is just my guess. He never said, but I think part of it was for a long time Clark Lee knew he was leaving. I don't think Junior Tuihalamaka is necessarily the type of linebacker that Clark Lee looks for the Mike. Clark Lee looks for rangier, athletic guys. It's just a different defense. And so that's what he's looking for. And Marcus Freeman's defense is different. You know, a lot of times the Mike is going to have a linebacker to each side of him. That wasn't true of the Mike and Clark Lee's defense because the Rover was so far out a lot of times that it was like the Mike had a lot more ground to cover, which is why he liked the guys that are a little bit rangier. But, but again, I think a big part of it was just he wasn't coming back. And he was gone like a month before at least a month before Marcus Freeman was hired. So I think that's part of it as well. And plus, again, Clark Lee couldn't get out and see Junior. They didn't have a junior. There was no fall film to watch of Junior. I'm not banging Clark Lee for this. I mean, I get it. It's fine. It wasn't a knock for me to say about how he didn't get offered till Freeman showed up. It wasn't a knock on Clark Lee as much as a look what Marcus Freeman was able to do in a quick period of time. He identified players that he liked. Look, Clark Lee identified guys that he liked. He offered Josh Burnham. They offered Nolan Ziegler. They offered guys that he liked. Brent and Marcus Freeman liked guys that he wanted, and he runs a little different defense. So that's really where I was coming from. Kenny Moore says, I enjoy sticking it to Michigan more than USC. That's because, for my part, I've found USC fans to be more enjoyable than Michigan fans. That's why I like sticking it to Michigan, because their fans can be just unbearable. Mike Huff says it is a staff-wide thing. However, a lot of these guys have been there a while, right? They weren't getting these types of guys until Freeman came aboard. Great hire by Kelly to get Freeman. Sort of. I'd say Mike Elson has had success recruiting top players. I mean, Mike Elson, I think any position coach needs a strong coordinator. And if you look at Mike Elson, he's gotten Jason Adamiola, Isaiah Foskey, Jacob Lacey. Those are highly ranked guys. Justin Adamiola was highly ranked early in the when they got Justin Adamiola, Justin was actually ranked higher than Jason was when they got him at the time. Mike Elson was responsible for getting Myron Tungavaloa. I mean, he's put in a lot of work recruiting. He was the primary recruiter, even though he wasn't the D-line coach at the time. He was the primary recruiter for Julian Aguara. So Mike Elson's been getting top. I mean, Sheldon Day. I mean, we could go down this list. Mike Elson's done a pretty good job recruiting for a while. I think where Notre Dame struggled at times for years was just being able to balance year after year after year of getting those top players, because I think part of that was because of the defensive coordinators and the other strong coaches. But Mike Elson, I think, is the one guy that's consistently been able to bring in some good players. And now that he's had a couple, 3D coordinators in a row that were really good, Mike Elko from a recruiting standpoint, Clark Lee from a coaching standpoint, now Marcus Freeman from a recruiting standpoint, all three of them could coach. I'm just trying to emphasize who was really good recruiters. You've seen Mike Elson have more success consistently because of the help, because it's hard to do it by yourself. Like if you're Mike Elson and you're going against Larry Johnson from Ohio State, during a lot of his tenure, you weren't just going against Larry Johnson. You were going against Larry Johnson and whoever the D coordinator was, and Urban Meyer. Or a lot of times, because Brian Kelly wasn't involved with recruiting and the D coordinator, Brian McGorder was worthless as a recruiter. Bob Diaco, his last year, really scuffled. But, let's not forget, Mike Elson was also part of a staff that got Ishaq Williams, Stephon Tuitt, and Aaron Lynch in the same class, right? So – he was able to get some guys, but it was the consistency because he didn't always have help, so you're trying to go land a top recruit and you're going against Urban Meyer. You're going against whether it be Greg Schiano or who, their D coordinators from before then, and Chris Ash, different guys like that. And then you're going against Larry Johnson. Well, now if you're recruiting against Notre Dame for the 2022 class, you're going against Mike Elston, but you're also going against Marcus Freeman, and you're also going against Brian Kelly because Brian Kelly's more involved now. So I think those are the things that go into it. Yes, Marcus Freeman deserves a ton of credit, but Mike Mickens was bringing in some really talented corners before Marcus Freeman showed up. So I think where Marcus Freeman has made a big push is helping to close on a couple highly ranked guys like a Tyson Ford, like an Aiden Gabbera, who's since become a highly ranked guy, wasn't when they got him, which shows you their ability to identify players in the defensive staff. But, Mike Mickens got Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley and those guys last year without that help, right? It's the linebackers where we're seeing that impact. I mean, we wouldn't have Josh Burnham in the class right now if it wasn't for Marcus Freeman. We wouldn't have Junior Tuihalamaka in the class right now if it wasn't for Marcus Freeman. So, like, his position, it's been a huge impact. But other defensive coaches have been putting in work. That's why I say it's a staff thing on defense. He's the final piece of the puzzle, in my opinion. I hope that makes sense, Mike, but I understand where you're coming from. And Notre Dame 2164, who is a loyal listener, wants to rub it in all of our faces that he is in Panama City Beach right now. But awesome to hear. Go Irish here at Panama City Beach, and thought I'd stop in and say hi. Appreciate you being part of the show today. But don't appreciate that you're rubbing it in our face that you're in a much prettier place than we are right now at this particular moment. Chris asks, which of the LB recruits will have the best Notre Dame career in your opinion? I have no idea. I mean, look, I'm going to rank what there are as prospects and how they pan out. It's how they pan out. I mean, I can see all these guys having good careers. I'm not going to sit down and say, well, this one guy is going to be better than all these other guys. I could see any of these linebackers having big-time careers. I hope they all have big-time careers. Let's see here. Nicholas Galley says, what would you say, who would you say what would you say is the biggest remaining need in the 2022 class? Okay, so to me, it's playmakers at wide receiver. I think that to me is the biggest need because I like where they are at corner. I mean, look, even if they only got Jaden Mickey, they signed 4 corners last year. They'd survive, right, at corner without another corner. But I think they're going to get at least one more corner. Pretty good linebacker now, pretty good D-line now. I mean, you need another safeties. You could argue safety would be the position I would say is maybe in potential contention with receiver. But I really feel like, look, you need big-time playmakers at receiver. And I don't mean big-time like Devontae Smith, but you just need playmakers at receiver. I'm nervous about the future of the offense, that if a couple guys, if Xavier Watts, Lorenzo Styles, or Deion Colsey don't pan out, or all 3 of them don't pan out, I'm a little nervous about what the receiving core is going to look like past 2021 and 2022. And, I'm real nervous about that. Some of the guys that they're recruiting right now don't inspire a lot of confidence. Tobias Merriweather does, but a couple of the other guys that people are predicting going to end up at Notre Dame, it does not inspire confidence. These guys are going to be good enough to go beat Bama and Clemson, Ohio State on a regular basis, or even at all. So I think that's the biggest need. You need Tobias Merriweather. You need Xavier Bradshaw. You need at least those 2 guys. And if you can also add C.J. Williams in that mix, whoo, boy, that's a grand slam home run. And if Amorian Walker's as good as some people think he is based on what he's doing this summer, even better. But you have to get Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw. To me, that is the biggest need right now in this recruiting class. Technical Technician says this. Lee is not inspiring, flat out. I found his personality slightly contrived, simply my opinion. I understand that, and I respect your ability to have that opinion. But what I would say is I don't agree with that. I've had a chance to get to know Clark Lee a little bit. I got a chance to know a lot of people who know Clark Lee, players that played for him. Clark Lee did inspire players. He just did it in a different way. It's not a rah-rah in your face kind of guy, but I guarantee that the players were inspired by Clark Lee. They had a lot of faith in Clark Lee partly because they knew that Clark Lee had a lot of faith in them. And he was thoughtful. All of the things that he said, even in a one-on-one interview where he knew I was going to take his quotes and put them in the right context because I have no interest in making anyone look bad. He would still, we had a 2-hour-long conversation one summer when I was still at BGI for our preseason magazine because, number one, after the 30-minute interview I was supposed to have, he didn't have anything else coming up, and the SID left, and so Coach Lee and I just sat there for a couple hours talking football. But even talking football, like everything he says is with a purpose, right? I think that's a great teacher. I don't view that as contrived at all. I think it's a guy that is very thoughtful. He's a very intellectual guy. Everything he says is going to have a purpose to it. I don't buy it to be contrived at all. I just think he's just kind of got that philosophical mentality. I think he's a very genuine guy and a very good guy. Very, very much so. Cajun Irish says the Freeman hire was the ultimate gap closer. There's no question. Look, one of the SEC powers that recently won a title wanted him bad and was offering him big time money. And Notre Dame got them. A lot of what's happening now with this stuff, with the players they're bringing in, doesn't happen, especially linebacker doesn't. I don't know if Tyson Ford's in the class right now if it's not for Marcus Freeman helping Mike Elson get over the edge. I don't know if Aiden Cabrera is in the class right now. I know I'm very confident saying that Josh Burnham and Marcus and Junior Tuihalamaka are not in the class, and Jalen Sneed wouldn't have been in the class if they are able to get Jalen Sneed because they didn't offer that guy. So there's no question about it. Tom Balork says, you add Anthony Lucas, Cyrus Moss, and Jalen Sneed to this defense. Good Lord, Brian can play center field, and Notre Dame will be just fine. You're not necessarily wrong, Tom. I would say, hey, you better get to the quarterback, because if you don't get to the quarterback, we're going to be in trouble. But, yeah, that would be a heck of a group. I just don't see them getting all three of those guys. I think they'll definitely get one of them. But, I feel like there's a chance, at least a 50-50 chance you get one of the other two. But I don't see the other one for sure. Let's see here. Christopher DeCant says Michigan has not sniffed the college football playoff. That's not necessarily true. They were in the just outside. If they'd have beat Ohio State in 2018, they'd have been in. There's no question about it. All righty. All righty. Let's see here. Dylan Hoff, any word on the visits this weekend, particularly in Wangpo? Look, Dylan, they're in the middle of their Saturday visit. I don't start asking about stuff really till Saturday night, because all you're going to get right now is it's going great. I love the visit. It's a beautiful campus. I guarantee that's everything. It's awesome. Love it's just the same stuff all the time. That's not a shot on anybody covering the team. That's all I used to put out when I did these things back when I was covering recruiting on a day-to-day basis and talking to kids and breaking stories and all that kind of stuff. That's what I'd post, because that's all you're getting. You usually wait till like Saturday night and then Sunday when you can start talking to coaches and you can start talking to high school coaches and parents and recruits and all that kind of stuff. You start getting a little bit better feel for it. But right now I can just tell you that every player is having a great time. They all love it. It's beautiful campus, and they're having a blast and all that kind of stuff. And that's what every kid's going to say. So that's what we're going to get right now. Let's see. We got some Michigan USC comments. In a Michigan USC game, I would root for USC to win by 40. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, buddy. Sid Irish, I can't put that up there, Sid, because I'm going to get demonetized, but that's great. All righty. Let's see here. Omar also says, sorry I'm late. No problem, Omar. We're still going. You got plenty of time when I'm doing a show. This will be a championship defense if it isn't already. I agree. This is certainly a step in that direction. That is absolutely, absolutely true. Let's see if we can get some more questions. Jonathan says, so if we land Sneed, is it the best linebacker class in the country? What would be an ideal class for 2023 look like? I think this would be the best class in the country, in my opinion. I think 2023, you only recruit studs. I mean, you only recruit top players. I think in this class, you were able to add some size with Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka. I think in next year's class, I would focus a lot on speed. That's the thing I focus on. And there's speed in this class, especially if they get Jalen Sneed. But I would focus on really versatile, dynamic guys. Drake Bowen, Tackett Curtis, Trey Edwards, guys like that. I think you just focus on upper echelon players. I think that's where you got to get to as a team. It's not necessarily saying, well, we got this guy this year. It's every year, and this is what good coaches do. This is what I did when I was a coach, because this is what I was taught from the coaches I learned from. You're say, look, no matter what you do this year, your ultimate objective next year, there's always going to be like, hey, we need this, we need that. But your ultimate goal every year as a position coach is get better guys this year than you got last year. And if you sign your best linebacker class in Notre Dame in your history of Brian Kelly, this year your goal in the 2023 class is to recruit an even better one. That's what Bama tries to do. That's what Ohio State tries to do. That's what Clemson tries to do. And that's what Notre Dame needs to get to the point where they're doing. And you do that, and that's what Harry Easton did, right? You do that, that's how you start developing great units, and then great units, great position. That's how you develop great position groups, and then you have a bunch of great position groups. That's how you develop a great unit. And if you have great units on both sides of the ball, that's how you become a championship caliber football team. Ian Timmerman says, thanks for the scheme answer, Coach. I'm mostly self-taught and always really enjoy your scheme shows. Hey, That's what I kind of was as a kid. It wasn't until I really got to college that I even remotely started to learn stuff. I was a kid. Dad bought a Curtis Mathis VCR, and I just tape a bunch of college and NFL games and just watch and study the games. That's what, as we talked about yesterday in the mailbag, that's one of the things we like to do here is we like to help people learn more about the game as best we can. And a lot of times you guys already know it, but we're just backing up what you already know. But if we can get you to understand things a little different and kind of look through the game through a coach's eyes, and that's ultimately what we want to do. Chris Govia says, can you please compare and contrast Junior with Manti, who seems to be one of his favorite players? Chris, we talked about this earlier in the show. I would encourage you to go back when the show's over and listen to that, but I'll give you a little bit of just a couple little highlights here of what we discussed at the time. Number one, I think Junior's bigger and a little bit stronger than Manti was at the same age. I think Manti is more athletic than what Junior was at the same age. Those are the two differences. Where I think there's a lot of similarities is the bigger body. I think really good short area quickness. Instinctively, they're both top-notch instinctive guys. They're both top-notch high football IQ players, make great reads. Manti also had some issues in high school where he at times would maybe freelance a little bit, right? And you kind of had to break that out of him when he got to Notre Dame. Junior had a little bit of that as a junior in high school. But they're both powerful. They're both instinctive. They both are tight end to tight end guys. I think overall their game, like their style of play, is really close. There are some physical differences between the two, like I said, that I mentioned, but from a style of play standpoint, I think their games are very, very similar. And they're very similar up here, very smart, heady players, very powerful players. I think those are the areas where they are similar. Jonathan says, was Junior a silent commitment? My understanding is yes. I've had his commitment story written for a while. So I think that the visit was needed to solidify that. Because, again, a lot of these silent commitments didn't want to go public because they wanted to see the campus first they'd never been to. They wanted to meet coaches they'd never met face-to-face. So there's a greater chance that maybe in some of these guys you're not going to get those guys. But in this case, I've had this story written for a while. And there's a reason Notre Dame – if you look at a lot of other positions, they've been expanding the board for months. One position where Notre Dame has not expanded the board in the last month is linebacker. There's a reason for that. Rob Wicks, is Freeman the best recruiter Notre Dame has had since Vinny Serrato? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think Charlie Weiss is the best recruiter Notre Dame has had since Vinny Serrato. I think Tony Alford was really good. I think Charlie Weiss is very good. I think Chip Long was pretty good. I mean, if you go look at some of the players Chip Long brought in, I mean, his first full class, they got Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys. I think he did Michael Mayer. He got Michael Mayer at tight end, got George Takis at tight end, got Kane Barong at tight end, got he didn't get Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet was committed before Chip got here. But I mean, he landed some big-time tight ends. He had a huge role in getting Chris Tyree. I'm just telling you right now, I'm not going to get into it too much, but Lance Taylor did a really good job with Chris Tyree. But Chip Long is the reason ultimately that he came to Notre Dame because of how he handled his visits with Oklahoma and Alabama. He had a big, big role in that. I think he had a role in all. He was helpful in offensive line recruiting. I think he did a really good job as a coordinator too, which is why he oversaw Tyler Buckner. He was the primary reason they got Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey. Chip Long deserves a lot of credit for the young offensive talent that Notre Dame acquired. Marcus Freeman is following in that pedigree and I think could quickly take it to another level. But Chip Long did a pretty good job of loading up on offensive players. I don't think they've always been utilized very effectively or however they should. There's been some injuries, but I mean, from a recruiting ranking standpoint, I think Chip Long did a really good job as well. Let me see if we have some more questions here. Yeah. Sid Irish says, I'm sure Charlie Strong and Urban Meyer recruited well at Notre Dame as well. Yeah, Urban Meyer was a pretty good recruiter. But I don't think Urban had the success he would have had with a better head coach, though. I mean, if you go look at some of the guys he brought in some good players, but Urban didn't blow it up like he eventually became as a recruiter because he didn't have a lot of help. I mean, what offensive coach besides him would you have wanted to play for? I mean, their offensive coordinators are uninspiring and the head coach is uninspiring. Let's see here. Kenny Moore says Tony Alford was a great recruiter. Florida recruiting hasn't been the same since Tony left. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And then Jonathan did back me up on this. He said Holden Stace did get a bat signal. I thought so. I just wasn't 100% sure on that as well. He says Amorian Walker got a bat signal as well. I don't think so. I think Amorian committed pretty early. He committed before, I think, the back. I'm pretty sure Amorian committed before the bat signals started. Let's see here. Preston says, what is your current confidence level when it comes to Notre Dame landing Lucas? I think they have a good shot. I don't know if I could quantify it. He still has visits to take, right? I mean, I'm not going to know how until after all the visits are taken, but I think Notre Dame is in there. I absolutely do. Sid Irish says, I say take 27 kids and work the numbers out later, not like we don't have 5-6 transfers every year. I get that, Sid, but there's like a breaking point that you have to have as a staff to say we can't go past this number, because at that point in time, we're just forcing kids out. And Notre Dame doesn't and shouldn't force kids out. That then all of a sudden they're like the SEC schools that we all don't like. And that then they lose they're not Notre Dame anymore, right? They're not, you lose some of that what makes you different. So there's a breaking point where you can look at numbers and you have statistics to show you on average, we're going to lose X number of players a year, whether it be to transfer, whether it be to medical issues, and whether it be to guys leaving early for the NFL. You always have sort of an average, like, okay, we're minimum going to lose this number of guys. Then you know that there's a couple other guys that you probably get to graduate early and leave, because you tell them, like, look, here's the deal. You can stay if you want, but you're going to be graduated and you're not going to be in the mix. And so that's not forcing a guy to leave. That's kind of putting the writings on the wall. So there's a certain number. We say, hey, we feel confident we get to a certain number, but you just can't load up just to load up, because at that point in time, you have to basically say, we're going to accept the fact that we're going to just basically tell kids they got to go. And that gets dangerous because you can't force them to leave. Notre Dame honors 4-year scholarships. They don't do 1 year at a time like some other conferences. If you commit to Notre Dame, barring you breaking rules that get you dismissed from the university, they can't just pull your scholarship because you can't play or because it's another recruit. So now all of a sudden you get in a situation where, like, you're going to pull the recruit scholarship. What are you going to do? So I understand where you're coming from, but there has to be some strategy involved. That doesn't mean they can't get to 27, but there has to be some strategy involved there. Otherwise, they put themselves in a really, really bad situation. Jojo Pineda says, happy Father's Day to you, Brian and Vince. Obviously, I'm not a dad of kids. I'm a dog dad, and that's it. But I appreciate that, and I will pass that along to Vince for sure. A happy Father's Day to all dads. A happy Father's Day to my dad. I know my dad listens to the show every day, and I have a phenomenal dad. Dad took me to my first football game, went to my first Notre Dame game with my dad. And since, like I said, still listens to my show every single day. And I can assure you that I probably shouldn't say this because I don't know if it's arrived yet, but my sister bought my dad some Irish Breakdown gear for Father's Day. So he's going to get some more. I've gotten him some stuff, but he's going to get some more cool stuff because of my sister. Jojo says, happy early Father's Day to all the Irish Breakdown family fathers. Thank you, Brian, for doing today's show, and welcome Junior. Huge pickup. I agree. Christopher DeCant says, when is the next live show after today? So, Christopher, our schedule, I think you're kind of new to the channel. So our schedule is going to be every Monday to Friday at 1 o'clock p.m. And then we're going to try to do Wednesday night shows almost every Wednesday at 8 p.m. If there are breaking news like this, then we'll do shows. But it's Monday to Friday, 1 o'clock. I'm contemplating adding a Saturday show at 1 o'clock, but I'm not sure I'm going to do it yet. I just don't know what the interest is going to be on days where it's not a commitment like today. But we're definitely looking into doing that. But and of course, I'd love some feedback on that. But Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. So unless there's some news that breaks, and I'm not anticipating it, that's not a hint. That's not me dropping, a comment. But I'm not anticipating anything happening between now and Monday at 1 o'clock. But if it does, we'll be back then. But otherwise, it'll be our regularly scheduled 1 p.m. show. Sid Irish says Snead should get a 5th star. He deserves it. I mean, my stance on that. I'm not moving guys way up and down the rankings because of what they do without pads on. Sid Irish, the best players from Michigan come to Notre Dame, Jerome Bettis. Yeah. Did you see the picture? I don't know if you're on social media, but there's a picture of Josh Burnham, Rocco Spindler, Nolan Ziegler all in front of the tunnel. And it said, we're from Michigan and we came to Notre Dame. It's pretty cool. Preston asks, if Notre Dame strikes out with Lucas, do they have their eyes on another D tackle recruit, for example, Caleb Artis, or they just stick with Heinrich? They would stick with Heinrich. Because, again, we talked earlier, I think Tyson Ford's a guy that could end up playing D tackle. I think Jason Onye could end up being a D tackle. Plus, I do believe that Notre Dame wants to go to more of a 3-man look, and they'd like to have more ends big ends like Tyson Ford, Anthony Lucas type of big ends there to be able to do that as well. So Michael says, hey, Brian, good to catch you live. I think this is a huge pick up, not only for the defense, but in the overall class. Do you feel the same way? Absolutely, Michael. I think it's a huge pickup. I think it's huge from a recruiting ranking standpoint, just from the perception. I think recruiting rankings are more about perception than they are reality. I think it helps him practically. I think he's a very, very good football player. I think he fills a need of a pure Mike linebacker. I see no downside of this at all. Nick Baker says, first time watching on YouTube. I appreciate that, Nick. Welcome to the show. I know you and I have chatted before, but I appreciate you watching the show and joining. Hopefully you'll do it more. 1:00 p.m. every day Eastern. Join the show. No question. Jay Wiki Jr. Oh, baby. Hopefully Lucas Merriweather and some of the other guys come through. So hyped for this class. I agree. KMA Preston, would Xavier start as a freshman at Notre Dame? Xavier Niuafe is who you're referring to. I don't know. I think he'd have a shot. But look, Notre Dame's got some other good players. Houston Griffith could potentially still be on the team that year. The current freshman class is pretty good players. KJ Wallace, Litchfield Ajavon. Will he have a shot to start as a true freshman? Absolutely. Am I guaranteeing it? No, because he's got to prove himself. And right now he hasn't even played his senior year in high school yet. But from a prospect standpoint, he'd be the best prospect on the roster if he were to sign with Notre Dame, since we're assuming Kyle Hamilton's going to be gone. Kenny Moore is out of here. Fantastic show as always, Brian. Thank you, Kenny. I appreciate that very much. Let's get to some of these last questions to get through here. Boy, you guys just keep bringing it. Nick Baker, do we pass on an offensive lineman this year too? They may have to. Otherwise, they're going to be bringing in guys that are Plan B guys again, and they've been bringing in a few too many Plan B guys in recent years. But I think you need 4 linemen. I just do. I don't think you can get away numbers-wise with not having 4 in this class. You only signed 2 in 2020. You signed 5 last year. One of them's a bit of a project. Another one's just a backup kind of guy. You've lost already 1 guy from your 2019 class. You only had 3 in that class. Meaning in a 3-year stretch from 19 to 21, you don't have enough offensive linemen to fill a 2 deep. That's not good. So I think you need numbers in this class. And right now, things aren't looking great. They got to close on a couple guys on campus. I mean, you got Joe Bruner on campus this weekend. You got Emil Wagner on campus this weekend. And, of course, Carson Hensman on campus this weekend, who y'all know I'm very high on. You got Billy Shrouth. So hopefully they can close on Shrouth again and get Hensman or somebody like that. Or, like I said, Ashton Craig's a kid that I kind of have my eye on as a – I'd want to get him on campus, which is what I think they're doing. I think they're trying to get Ashton Craig on campus so Matt Bayless can size him up and say, yeah, this kid we can put weight on this kid or not. And then we'll have to see what's going on. Preston says, Sid Irish says, Quinn isn't killing it. You are correct. Preston says, saw Carnell Tate back on campus today. Got to be a good sign that OSU isn't way ahead of us. Right. Look, I don't think Ohio State was ever way ahead. I think what happens is this. Right? People take crystal balls and then they just assume that they're predictions for an imminent commitment, and that's not always the case. Some people are that way, but not everybody. And it's not just – that's just not what they're for. I mean, you have to understand what those things are for. There's always these momentum swings when it comes to recruiting. That's why I always say take a deep breath, let these things play out. Don't react to all these things that are meant to drive clicks up and to drive interest up that aren't necessarily – predictive things that are going to happen. I mean, we can go through some of these lists and talk about guys that are in Notre Dame's class or that end up not at Notre Dame that based on crystal balls, everybody assumed something was going to happen, and that's not how it panned out, right? So let's let it play out, but he was always meant to come back on campus today. This has been reported for weeks that he was going to come on campus early in June, and he was going to come back today for a camp. So I think it's just let's just relax and let the staff kind of fill this class out. And if they end up missing on them, then we can address that at the time. But yeah, Ohio State's making a great charge, but Notre Dame was the team to beat for a long time. And when you're the team to beat, sometimes you're going to get knocked down a little bit, but then you climb back up. And we're seeing that with Xavier Niuafe, right? I mean, Notre Dame was considered the team to beat very early on, and then Ohio State's kind of charged, and now Notre Dame's charging back. That's just the way that recruiting goes, right? Let's see here. MLA, he says, Devin Jackson, 625 official visit. I don't believe he's going to visit. I might still have that on my visit list, but that's not happening. I don't believe Notre Dame is recruiting him anymore. Sid Irish, notice 23 recruit Woodyard is Kyle Hamilton's cousin. That's cool. I saw him tweet that it's his cousin. He's actually a 2024 recruit. He's a rising sophomore. He is an impressive young-looking guy. Michael says, I miss being with IB live. Work always gets in the way of my fun. I'm sorry, Michael. That does stink. We are doing the Wednesday shows, though, at 8 o'clock Eastern. So if you're able to catch those, definitely check those out. Delali says, is Sebastian Cheek still in the mix? And is that who we go after if we don't get Snead? He is not in the mix anymore. No, that visit, he was supposed to be on campus this weekend. That visit has been canceled by Notre Dame. It is Jalen Snead or bust for Notre Dame at this point in time. Emily, he says, Mac Markway to that tight end. No, he is a 23. I think he's a solid player. I think he's a big, impressive-looking physical specimen. I don't see him as being a guy that I would take right now. I think they might take him right now. He was on campus. But I just would, with how well you recruited in recent years, I'm not bringing a guy that projects to be a really good blocker, like a great blocker and a chain mover. Is not the guy. I'm going after the true studs like Deuce Robinson and Jackson Howard. But, we'll see what they do. All righty, let's go down here. Robert asks, does Brian have a cold? Sounds different. No, Robert, I do not have a cold, but I appreciate you noticing. My voice is pretty much shot. I got sick in the middle of the night a couple nights ago and went through some activities that night that afterwards kind of left my throat pretty torn up. So sounded really terrible on Thursday. Actually, I had to cancel the podcast on Thursday because I just wasn't feeling good, and Vince didn't want to do the show by himself, which those are not easy to do solo, as we're finding out today. But somewhat better yesterday, and today I sound even better than I did yesterday, I think. So if you think I sound different today, you should have heard me yesterday. It was pretty bad. Sid Irish says, Markway is good. Hope we get Howard or Robinson in. He should be able to land any tight end. I agree with you there. Markway's a good player, but they got to go after him. Emily, he says, safety KJ Winston. You like him, right? So KJ's an interesting kid, Emma, because I didn't love his sophomore film, but there just wasn't a lot of it. Didn't play a junior season in the fall. Maryland had a 3-game spring season. So I just haven't seen a lot of KJ Winston. What I've seen of him, there's things I like. He's a long kid. He's a physical kid. He's an alley player. He's got some quickness to him. He's got some tightness from a backpedal standpoint, but I don't know how often you're going to be asking him to backpedal. But he brings some things to the table. He would not be one of my top 2 safeties, but he's a guy that you look at and say, there's some projectability there that, maybe I don't love him now, but you get him at Notre Dame, you coach him up, you get him out of some of those bad habits, you teach him better technique, he gets more experience because he just doesn't have a ton of experience right now. He could be a guy that shoots way up there. Would I be fired up about him committing right now? No, because again, like with Amorian Walker, I can't just assume he's going to be something at Notre Dame that if a guy doesn't show something on film in high school, I can't say, I know he didn't do this in high school, but he's going to do it at Notre Dame, right? Reminds me of the old Moneyball scene where Billy Bean, obviously Brad Pitt says, can he hit? And so, yeah, he can hit. He goes, well, why doesn't he hit? He doesn't hit in minor leagues. We're going to bring him up to major leagues and he's going to hit all of a sudden, right? Like that's where I'm coming from. And so, but with KJ, I see some things I like. He just doesn't have a lot of experience. And so he's a guy that I'm very intrigued to see what he does as a senior. But there's some things you look at and say, boy, I understand why the staff is looking at that kid, even though maybe I have a couple players ranked higher. I get it because there's some tools there. And, of course, he'll be on campus next week. Sid Irish says, Nwankpa, Pope, Winston, that's how I would rank them. That's how I would rank them right now as well. Let's see here. Chili's in the chat room. He's fired up about this commitment. Michael says, I feel very confident that the home run will be hit not only this recruiting year, but also next year on the football field. I dig it, Michael. And this is all weekend. When Wagner looks left, he should see D. And when he looks right, he should see Spindler. Yeah. I imagine you're talking about, I would say, Blake Fisher? Is that who you're talking about? Jojo asks, hi, Coach D, do you think Junior is similar to Tavon Coney? No, I don't think so. I think he's a little different. I think he's bigger, stronger. Oh, he did say Fisher. Yeah, I agree with that on that one. No, I think Manti's a good comparison. I think that body type, the instincts. I think Tavon was a pretty instinctive player, but Tavon had really tight hips and was very much a liability in coverage. I don't think that Junior is going to be that much of a liability in coverage, and I think he's a better player than Tavon was. But Tavon was pretty productive as well. Oh, Adam coming bold with the prediction today. No doubt in my Adam Kipker says, no doubt in my mind, Notre Dame wins the national championship, wins a national championship or two in the next 5 years. I dig it. Here we go. Michael also come with the fire, and I'm assuming he's talking about if they get Jalen Sneed. This is the best linebacker position groups in Stonebreaker, Pritchett, and Bolkar. Were they all part of the same class? Or are you talking about the roster when they were on the same roster? Because I don't think they were on the same class. I could be wrong on that. That's a little bit. I was young then. Okay. Yeah, Kirk Herbstreit. Yeah, we're not going to talk about him in the show today. Let's get back to some more questions. Oh, come on. Let's see here. Omar says, we will keep this going all day because when you talk indie ball, it's like a siren singing, but go ahead and test that voice. We need you for the long haul. I appreciate that. All righty. See if we got any more questions here before we wrap up. We're getting kind of close to the end. Let's see here. Michael says, I agree. Don't force kids out because then we are no better than Alabama. I agree with that. I agree with that completely. Tommy, well, hello to the physical IB family who's watching. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody being a part of the show. We've had really good retention of the show throughout. Before you leave, we're wrapping up soon. But before you leave, please, please, please hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel. We have shows every weekday at 1 o'clock Eastern. You can check out our website, which you see below, the entire show. We're trying to beat it into your head, irishbreakdown.com, our merch store. You can find a link to our merchandise store. You get hats and shirts like this, and a lot of people have bought them. We sold a lot that first week in May. We sold even more in June so far, so I'm very excited about that, being part of the family. But to also share these shows. If you have family members or if you just want to share them on your channels, we greatly appreciate that. All those things help us when it comes to algorithms to make sure that more people are seeing YouTube sees those things. They love it, and they use more to get those guys going. So I appreciate that very, very much, and appreciate all the kind words. I'm going to see if there's any last questions here. I'm going to try to get to. I hope that some of these questions I'm just not going to get to. I apologize, but I'm kind of running on fumes now with my voice. I'm having to take drinks every 2 seconds. Michael says, subscribe, hit the like button, tell your Notre Dame friends they must be here. So Michael says you have to do that, and I agree with him. Sid Irish, Tyson Ford looked like Tuitt with that number 7. Yeah. You saw that too. Yeah, you saw that too. Let's see. Eugene McGovern asks, even though he's a bit undersized now, does the O-lineman prospect from Indiana have similar skills to Taylor? Yeah, he's smaller. Eugene, we talked a little bit about this in yesterday's the mailbag, and so I won't get too much into it today, and we'll probably talk about it here coming up soon. But look, here's my question on him. If I'm a Notre Dame coach, here's what I'm doing with Ashton Craig. It's exactly what they're doing right now, right? Hey, let's bring him in on a visit. I don't think they've offered him yet. Bring him on a visit. Let Matt Bayless size him up. And this is what I know. Mike Elson has done this. I know that Terry Heastan would do that. I know that Jeff Gwynn does this. Let Matt Bayless size the kid up. Let Matt Bayless get to know him and those types of things. Hey, and then Matt says, hey, look, this kid's not going to be – if this kid gets past 280, he's going to lose. He's going to get tight. He's going to lose quickness and that kind of thing. And then you say, okay, that's not a kid that we want at the offensive line. But if Matt Bayless says, hey, yeah, I can get this kid up to 290 plus, and he's going to be explosive and powerful and all that, then you take him, right? It's like Robert Hainsey, right? I mean, that's what you do. And so if Matt Bayless gives him the go-ahead and he thinks he can get up to that, because I don't know. I haven't seen the kid in person. And those undersized kids, I need to see him in person to really have a feel, because you need to see what kind of – do they have narrow shoulders? Do they have broad shoulders? Do they have kind of a narrow core? Or do they have some thickness to them? But then you just need to get some – you need to get more calories into them, and you need to get them in the strength program, and then their metabolism slows down, because – a 16-year-old is going to have a different metabolism from a 20-year-old, and a 20-year-old is going to have a different metabolism from a 25. And then you get to my age and you have no metabolism left anymore. But those are the things I see. And if Matt Bayless thinks that, what you see is a kid that's got a really nice punch for his size, a kid that's really athletic, a kid that's got some power, a kid that's got some length to him, Eugene, and a kid that you say, if this kid can be a legit 290 plus and play like a guy that big, because not all 300-pounders play like a 300-pounder because it's not great weight. If you think he can get there and maintain that foot quickness and speed and explosiveness and all that, then he's kind of that Joe Alt kind of guy, like a project, a 3-star kid that you look at and say, if he were to go to a Big Ten school like in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Indiana, You never hear about him for 2-3 years, and all of a sudden, as a redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior, he's an all Big Ten kid, and you're like, who the heck is this kid, right? That's what Joe Alt was, and that's why I say I'll take a Joe. If you're taking 4-man classes every year and you're giving me one Joe Alt type of player every year, I can live with that as long as the other 3 are dudes, right? And that to me is what Ashton Craig is. And so if you get him and Billy Schrouth or Carson Hinsman with the 2 kids you have, I'd say, you didn't quite, you struck out at tight end again or tackle again as far as the top level kids, and that's a problem, right? But if you remove what should have been or what could have been and just look for what is, it's a good class. It's like last year's class, Eugene. If I look at last year's offensive line class, you see 2 studs at the top and then a big drop off to Joe Alt, who's a high upside guy but a low floor, and then Caleb Johnson's just a solid player, but that's it. And then Pat Coogan's a rotational guy. You don't see the depth like in the 2017 class where your top 3 was, you had the studs and Banks and Hainsey, but then you had Josh Lugg as your number 3. Josh Lugg compared to Joe Alt as a prospect is a big difference. Now, Joe Alt could end up being every bit as good, if not better than Josh Lugg, but I'm talking about as a prospect. This class is going to be similar. Top 2 really strong, and then a drop-off, unless you can get Schrouth or Hinsman. Then it's like, okay, it's top 3's pretty strong, and then you get your 4th guy as a project, but a high ceiling project. I can live with that. It's not as good as it should have been. It's not good as it could have been. That's something Brian Kelly needs to address with his coaches to say, look, you got to get better here. But it's still a good class. If you have to be able to look at recruiting in 2 ways. Number one, you have to, and this is what a head coach should do. You have to be able to evaluate what we should have done. Okay, we should have got this guy or this guy. We didn't do a good enough job. And then you bring your coach and say, what are we going to do to make sure that next year we don't have these misses again for the 3rd year in a row, these kind of big misses. And then you address it, and then you move on. You figure it out. We're not going to have this happen again. But then there's the other part of looking at it. I said, but okay, so besides that of what could have been, what was this class? This class was still pretty good. And I think those are the 2 ways you have to look at it. And you have to be able to have that. I mean, the problem is too many people say it wasn't as good as it could have been, so Quinn sucks. Well, that's not fair. If they get Schrouth or Hinsman, and then this Ashton Craig kid, if Matt Bayless gives you the thumbs up that you should take him, you say, okay, no, that's not accurate, but it's also not accurate to say, well, Quinn's the greatest thing ever and you can't criticize him at all. Those are 2 really just not rational points of view. We need to be able to have a 2-edged conversation here, and one to say, okay, we're evaluating on what this class should have been based on your O-line, who you should have landed, who you missed on. How did you handle your board, all those kind of things. And then you got to then look at and say, okay, but then what was the class? And say, okay, it wasn't as good as it needs to be, and that's becoming problematic and needs to get addressed. But the sky's not falling because they still landed good football players. That's the conversation we need to have, and I think that's where we're at right now when it comes to offensive line recruiting. But they could also get Schrouth and Hinsman and that kid, and I'm feeling really good about the offensive line class. So let's just see how it plays out. But yeah, I have some concerns. About what's going on right now, offensive line class. But it's June 19th. We're a long way away from really having a feel for what this class is going to be. If we get this July 19th, we'll have a better idea of where things stand with this offensive line class. Ryan Haley says, Brian, who do you think is next to commit, Snead, Merriweather? I don't know that Merriweather has a time frame, and I don't know that he's definitely going to commit. I believe he's going to Stanford next weekend, so I don't think he's going to be making a decision before that. And it's not even guaranteed he's going to make a decision this summer, at least not a public one. If he does, I feel really good about where Notre Dame stands. If he makes, and I've been saying this, Ryan, I think you've heard this from me say this for well over a month, and I'm going to stick by it. If he makes a summer decision, I feel it's going to be Notre Dame. If this drags out into next December and January, I'll get a little bit more nervous. Robert, I hope I feel better too. I appreciate that very much. Let's see here. We've now gotten into a political conversation here, so let me move past that. Garth says, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We're going to stick to football in this part of it, but people have some conversations over here. Emma Leahy says, when is Bradshaw visiting? I believe it's going to be next weekend. I believe Tom Loy and Mike Singer have both reported that. We have not been able to get confirmation from Xavion himself, but I believe both of those guys are reporting that. And so I can confidently say that is happening. And the reason we haven't put it on our list is because we haven't confirmed it. Otherwise, I'm just taking from their list, and that's not how we do things. We try to confirm it for ourselves. Let's see here. Let's get to some actual football questions here, and then we're going to wrap it up. All righty. And Michael, I see your question about the O-line, but let's address that maybe in one of these Monday or Tuesday shows. We'll get into that because that could be a whole show by itself. So the rest of our conversation about politics. So I am bowing out of that. I'm going to jump in here and wrap things up here about football. So I appreciate everybody being part of the show today. This was a fun show. It went by long. I'm about done being able to talk. But before you leave, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button first, then hit subscribe to our channel, and then hit the notification bell, which is going to let you know when you get subscriptions. If you're listening via our podcast through any of the podcast apps, I would appreciate it if you give us a 5-star review. All of those things are meant to allow us to then be more in front of more eyes. The more 5-star reviews, the more likes on the YouTube channel, the more shares and all those type of things. Essentially what it does is it kicks into an algorithm, and that means that it becomes more attractive to them to send it out and get in front of more eyes, and that's how we grow our channel. And so I'd appreciate everybody doing that. And then, of course, as always, check out irishbreakdown.com. If you like the gear that we wear in the shows, a lot of people in the channel have bought stuff from us. You can see our merch store down at the bottom, and you can order stuff from there. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up on my email at brian@irishbreakdown.com or hit me up on Twitter at CoachD178. I hope everybody has an amazing rest of your weekend. All the fathers out there, happy Father's Day. To my dad, who I know is listening to the show, happy Father's Day, Dad. I love you. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will talk to you again very, very soon.